Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Soul Chess in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 1, Lelouch arrives. Lelouch's POV. Yes, I destroy worlds, create worlds. I am ready to enter hell. I opened my eyes to find myself lying on my back in a clearing in between two forests. There was a blue sky and white clouds above me. Did I survive? I wondered. I sat up and felt my chest. No blood stain. I looked down. I was wearing my casual clothes, my red jacket, my black sleeveless shirt and my navy blue jeans. But that doesn't matter, I was killed wearing my emperor robes. Did C.C. refuse to let me die? I looked around. No nearby water, she can't be washing out my clothes. I opened my shirt and spread my hand across where I was stabbed. No scar either, even when C.C. was injured there were still remnants of her blows. I stood all the way up and rebuttoned my shirt. So I succeeded in dying. I looked around some more, feeling the wind and hearing birds. So then where the hell am I? This place is too peaceful to be hell. Or if it is, it's certainly not like how I imagined it. I closed my eyes. So, now what? Suddenly I noticed a peculiar oddity. With my eyes closed and my mind clear, I could sense several presences. When I opened my eyes they were gone, but when I closed them and focused I could sense them again. What's this strange phenomenon? I questioned. Why can I all of a sudden sense other people? Is this some form of afterlife power? I should investigate it when I have the chance. For right now, I'll let this power lead me towards shelter. I followed the presences in my head when I felt I was lost and eventually found myself out in a market square. People seemed to be going about their daily lives and everyone, for the most part, didn't seem miserable. I closed my eyes and scratched my head. This place sure ain't hell. I laughed to myself. Again though, with my eyes closed I sensed those presences again, but I sensed less presences than there were people around me. Does this mean I can only sense certain people? But if so, what do all these people have in common that I can sense? I opened my eyes. And how do they differ from the ones I can't? Hey, move it! I heard someone shout and then got rammed from behind and sent tumbling across the ground. I got up and ran over to the guy that was pushing the cart that rammed me. Hey, what the hell was that for? I demanded to know. He didn't respond. I grabbed his shoulder and turned him around to face me. Answer me. Damn you. Sorry, he said with no flicker of emotion, you see my business isn't doing too well lately and my wife is sick and you just happened to be in my way. No, it can't be. I started to back away from the guy. He blinked a few times. Hey, what do you want, you brat? He shouted. Sorry, I ran away from him and over in between two stalls and stopped to catch my breath. Do I really still have the geese? Why didn't I lose it when I died? Shouldn't the contract have ended with my death? I looked around and the shop next to me had a fragment of glass of which I could see my reflection in it sitting on the counter. I walked in front of the stand. Mind if I look at this for a moment? Not unless you plan on buying it. The merchant snapped. I had no time to deal with self-centered people. I had to know if I still had my geese. Oh, I'm sorry, allow me to rephrase my statement. I looked at the merchant in the eyes. I'm borrowing this and I'll give it right back. He changed as if he was under the influence of my geese. Yes, go ahead, he said. I held up the glass to look at it, only my right eye showed the geese emblem reflected in it. I put my finger up to my left eye. The contact lens was still there. I removed it. Both eyes reflected the geese. I put the lens back and threw down the glass in disgust. It shattered. No. I shouted and ran away as far as I could. I ran and I ran and I ran with my eyes shut tight, disbelieving that I was cursed even after death. Instinctively my eyes flew open when I realized I would have ran straight into a lake if I ran any farther. I dropped to my knees and looked at my reflection in the water, seeing my geese reflected in my right eye. I still had this curse. Even after death I could not go on and be at peace with myself. Calm yourself, Lelouch 6 Britannia. I looked up and across over the lake. Who's there? I called out. There was no answer. Answer me. I covered my right eye with my palm and laughed. I'm getting too old to be hearing voices at my age. Excuse me. I heard someone call out. I turned around to see a small girl with strawberry blonde hair, with bright blue eyes, her hair covering her left eye, run up to me. She was dressed in dirt brown rags. Her top had torn seams on her upper right shoulder. What is it? I asked her, turning around and clutching my right eye. She held up her hand, palm facing up. There was a small object in her hand. It was my contact lens. I saw you drop this when you got hit by that shopping cart. I wanted to return it to you, so I followed you here. I see, I responded. Thanks for returning it. You're welcome, the young girl said, all bubbly. What's your name? She asked me. Normally it's polite to give your name before asking someone else to give theirs, I told her. She smiled brightly. I'm Rangiku Matsumoto, she said. So what's your name, mister? I'm Lelouch Lamperouge, I told Rangiku. Nice to meet you, Lelouch-kun, she said with a smile and extended her hand up to me. I shook it. Say, you wouldn't mind helping me find my friend, would you? He always leaves without telling me where he's going and I worry about him. Well, if you want something from me, perhaps you can give something to me, I stated. She took 2 steps back in a timid fashion. What brought on that reaction? I shook my head. There are 219 different reasons I can think of that would produce that reaction, but none of which should affect her if I amend my statement. I just want some information. I'm new here, so perhaps you can help me. Oh, I see, so you just arrived here. Well, this is Rukonga, Rangiku told me. It's the area that takes up the majority of this world, called the Soul Society. Soul Society? I questioned. Well, I mean, you died, right? Rangiku asked me. So this is the afterlife after all. But Soul Society? I never heard of this afterlife. As I pondered, a realization came to me. Wait a minute, this girl's just a kid. Wait a minute, does that mean you also? Huh? Oh, yeah, but... Rangiku looked down at herself. It's strange. I used to be so much older than this when I was alive. She cupped her developing chest, and I used to be a lot bigger than this too. She dropped her hands at her sides and looked up at me. But also there are souls here that were born here, but of course I'm not one of them. I see. So that means souls here must live a lot longer, so they may degrade according to their age. I looked back at the river, but then why am I as I was when I died? Why do the same laws not apply to me? I looked at my hand. I wonder. Rangiku began coughing. What's wrong? It's you're... She gasped as she hit the ground. Me? I didn't do anything. I still thought it would be best if I put some distance between Rangiku and me. She took a few deep breaths and stood up. I see, so you have spiritual power. Spiritual power? I questioned. It means you're special here. Not all souls have it, but those who do are said to be gifted. Just now your spiritual power leaked out and you have so much of it that it caused me to collapse, Rangiku said to me. I see, so I can't be near you, I said, feeling melancholy. Another curse to add onto the pile. Now you can come near me, you just have to learn to control your spiritual power, Rangiku said to me. How do I do that? I asked. Rangiku opened her mouth to speak, but then hung her head. So she has no idea, I thought. Well, you could become a Soul Reaper, but... She put her hands behind her back and started squirming in place. Well, you seem like a good person, and well, my other friend always leaves me alone, and well, I get lonely, and so... You want me to live with you, is that it? I asked her. Sorry, but I'm a loner, I told her. What's this you said about Soul Reapers? Rangiku seemed disappointed in my refusal, but answered my question nonetheless. Soul Reapers are souls that have gained special powers by joining the military faction, the Godai 13. Only souls with spiritual power and nobles can become Soul Reapers. If you tried, you could easily become one. Why does the afterlife need a military organization? I asked. Well, not all souls become pluses like us. Some more evil and corrupted spirits become hollows, At least that's what I've heard. I've never actually seen a hollow, but apparently they're these evil monsters that prey upon innocent souls to grow stronger. They also prey upon living humans. The Soul Reapers protect us from those creatures. They're also like law enforcement here in the Soul Society, Rangiku explained. My fist clenched. So monsters in this world exist even in the afterlife, do they? Rangiku continued her explanation. Soul Reapers purify these hollows and purge them of their sins. At least that's what I've heard. I relaxed a little. It was good to know that the military here prided itself in protecting the weak. I was reminded of the Black Knights. I think I might join, I said aloud. I walked past Rangiku. Wait, she ran forward and grabbed my sleeve. I looked at her. She looked like troubled as she looked at me. Won't you please stay? She asked. I told you before, I said, shaking her off. I walk alone. I continued to walk only to realize Rangiku was following me. Are you going to follow me until I change my mind? I thought you can't get too close to me anyway, I said, glancing back at her. There is another way to control your spiritual power. Well, not necessarily control it, but the more I stick around you, the more I become used to you. You know, like an immunity, she said. That's immunity, I corrected. I told you before though. I put my hands in my pockets and continued to walk. Rangiku wasn't following me, but after I took 3 steps she started crying. I turned around. What? Are you crying because you aren't getting your way? I thought you said you used to be older. Suddenly a makeshift spear landed just to my right. Any closer left and I would have lost a finger. I turned around and saw a kid with silver hair and his eyes shut. He was dressed in similar rags to Rangiku. Ah, nuts. I missed ya. Jin. Rangiku recognized him. See, and here's your friend, so quit crying, will you? I asked her. Ranchan. Jin went over and picked up his spear. Were you crying cause you wanted to know where I was? That was part of it, I guess, she sniffed. I continued to walk on. Their business was not my business. It wasn't long though before that damn spear sailed over my shoulder and blocked my path. I turned around. You got a problem, kid? I got a couple of choice words for ya. Ya seem kinda out of place to me in those clothes, see? And on top of that, I don't let anyone who makes Ranchan cry just walk away, Jin said to me. She's only crying because I've decided to become a Soul Reaper rather than staying with the two of you. I told her a couple of times before she started turning on the waterworks that I'm a loner, but she wouldn't listen, I explained. Being a loner ain't exactly the best idea, ya know? And besides, it's a long walk from here to the Siratai where the Soul Reaper folk reside. You're best stickin' with us till to send a patrol unit down here and then go back with the patrol, Jin told me. Why's that? When you're alone you make your own rules. When you're alone. Jin cut me off. When you're alone you're the perfect target for hollow bait. And you, my friend, are mighty tasty lookin'. If I were a hollow I'd find your appearance and spiritual power to be absolutely delicious. If ya want to get eaten, fine by me. You're bluffing, I stared at him. If I were bluffing I wouldn't have been carrying this spear around. Ranchan's supposed to stay in our little hut whenever I go out, but I guess I took too long this time, he scratched his head. You take too long a lot of times, Jin, and you never tell me where you're going either, Rangiku snapped at him. My bad, Jin apologized. He looked at me. Come on, big guy, you don't want to have it on your conscience if something bad happens to this poor innocent little girl, do you? Rangiku put on the most innocent look she could. Isn't that what the Soul Reapers are for? I asked. The Soul Reapers can't exactly keep track of every little soul. It's not uncommon for 2 little brats like Ranchan and me to suddenly die or starve to death. If we do though, it's no skin of deer backs, we'll just become reincarnated as living souls, Jin answered. They don't care? That didn't sit right with me. The Soul Reapers pride themselves in protecting us, but they can't always protect all of us. It's survival of the fittest for us non-Soul Reaper folk, Jin continued. Please stay, Lelich-kun, Rangiku looked at me with pleading eyes. For a moment I thought I was looking at Nunnally before she was blind and crippled, but I closed my eyes and shook my head to the side slightly and dashed away such images. Jin always brings back more food than we need every time he goes out. We can sustain you until a patrol unit comes by. I looked to the side avoiding eye contact and scratched the back of my head. I suppose I can stay. I mean, it's not like it's a big rush. It really wasn't. The Godi may 13th not be able to protect everyone, but at least they were trying. That would change when I got there. The Soul Society had existed this long till I got here. A bit of time spent protecting these kids wouldn't make much of a difference till I got there and worked my way up to make them a more efficient group. Then it's settled, you'll stay with us till the patrol unit comes by. Follow me, Jin took off. Come on Lelich, Rangiku ran off. Hey wait a minute. I called out. I ran after them and they started getting really far ahead of me. Damn it, at this rate I'll lose them. I closed my eyes as I ran only for that strange power to kick in. I stopped. I can sense Rangiku and Jin. With my eyes closed, using my senses I followed not where they were, but where I thought they might be heading. Like a blind person I used this sixth sense to navigate my way towards Rangiku and Jin. Eventually I realized they had stopped moving and I opened my eyes to see us in front of a wooden cabin. There was a small pond nearby and a log set out in front of the house. Oh my, did ya get here by sensing us Lelich? Jin asked. I guess I did, I said holding my head. You're gonna be a great soul reaper if you can already sense people with spiritual power like that, Jin told me. I'm really out of shape, I admitted. Ah well, being a soul reaper should fix that den. I've been in Rukonga a while and I've seen even some folks as big as whales move like deer in top form, Jin stated, provided you can handle the rigorous training I hear about, you'll be fine. He walked past me. Anyway I gotta get going and get back to what I was doing. Stay here with Ranchan would ya? Hey hold on now. I thought you said being a loner was a bad thing, I looked at him. Jin looked up at the sky. Judging from the position of the sun it's still midday. Hollow attacks become more frequent at night. I got time. Then we'll all go together, I said to him. I move faster on my own. I need ya to stay here with Ranchan while I go out and get some food. You're not fast enough to hunt and you're not crafty enough like I am to steal without getting caught. I can spot my own kind. You're not my kind, but you're close. He opened his eyes and looked at me. The blue color and the fact that they were only open halfway made him look really creepy with that big huge smile on his face. You're lucky Ranchan likes ya. Like I told you before you look mighty tasty to hollows and I enjoy swallowing up tasty looking people like a snake. He then took off leaving me feeling rather disturbed. You have a weird friend, I told Rangiku. Jin's might be a bit off center, but he's got some good qualities to him. I mean he might leave all the time, but he always comes back. He's very reliable especially when I ask him for something, Rangiku defended the kid. Well anyway, the place looks nice, I said and walked up to the door, let's see the inside. Inside the house there were no working lights except for a couple of candles. There was a low rising table, some crates scattered about, a single bed and a pillow and some blankets. There was no food stored anywhere visible. How do you guys survive without stored food? I asked. In Soul Society you only get hungry if you have spiritual power and even then only if your power is exhausted, but Jin stores the leftovers in the crates, Rangiku said and opened one revealing food that was thrown about inside the crate. There were stacks of crackers, some tomatoes, some apples, some bananas and a couple of carrots and potatoes. Help yourself. Thanks, I said going for an apple. I examined it to make sure it wasn't rotting, cleaned off some dirt and looked around. What are you looking for? Rangiku asked. Well this should be properly washed shouldn't it? I asked. You can use the pond if you want, but I've never gotten sick after I brushed the dirt off, Rangiku stated. I sighed. I guess immune systems are higher here in the Soul Society. Well, bottoms up. I bit into the apple. A few hours later. Nightfall. Jin came back as Rangiku and I were playing chess. Apparently she and Jin had a set locked away in one of the crates as well as some other games like checkers, tic-tac-toe, and go. I was going easy on Rangiku, but I wasn't about to let her win either. So you're playing chess are ya? Jin asked as he dragged a big bag behind him into the house. Yeah, I said and moved my queen to e4. Checkmate. I told Rangiku. Hey. She got mad that I had led her on the whole game. What's in the bag? I asked Jin. Well, Jin reached into it and pulled out a pillow and a few blankets. You need a place to sleep. It seemed like that stuff had been taking up most of the room in the bag. He pulled out a big object. I also got this. He leaned up a mirror on the far side of the wall. Now you don't have to use upon to see your reflection, Ranchan. Ah, wow, it's perfect. Rangiku ran over to the mirror and began posing in front of it. Jin finished unpacking, which included a couple of loaves of bread in a bucket, which I could only assume would be for getting the water out of the pond for drinking. He sat down at the table in front of me. You play? He asked. Yeah, I nodded. I'm really good at this game, yeah no. Jin's smile widened. You want to go around? I asked. Sure thing, Jin said. I have to warn you though, if you're gonna tell me you're good at this, I'm not going to hold back like I did with Rangiku, I said, resetting the board. Would be a waste if ya did, Jin told me. We started playing and I could tell right away that Jin was no amateur. He was good, but I was better. He was surprised that after I moved the pawn in front of my king that I moved my king. That's an interesting move, he commented. If the king does not move into battle his men won't follow, I told Jin. The game continued and then Rangiku started watching. After a while longer I lost half my pawns, a bishop and a rook. Jin had lost both his knights, almost all of his pawns and one rook. Currently it was his turn. He moved his white squared bishop. Check. I took his bishop with a nearby pawn. He moved one of his remaining pawns. I took it with my queen. Check. He moved his king out of the way. I moved one of my pawns to the edge of the board and took back my rook. Checkmate. Jin looked at the board and opened his eyes to examine it more thoroughly. He looked at me, closed his eyes and smiled. What do ya know? Yeah, got me. Wow, Lelich, you must be really good if you can beat Jin, Rangiku told me. How could you tell? Don't you two just play by yourselves? I asked. Nah, Jin said and went over to one of the grates and pulled out a plaque. I got this a couple of months ago. The plaque was an award for victory in a chess tournament in the market square. According to this, Jin placed second. I woulda won completely, but I got beat by a Shinigami. I remember him clear as day, square-rimmed glasses and brown hair. I don't remember his name, but the next time I see that guy I'm gonna have ya play him. I think ya might be able to beat him. That's high praise. I thought you didn't like me, I teased. Who said I didn't like ya? When I said ya looked delicious I was complimenting ya, he said. He looked at the window, the moon was out. Anyway, we should get some sleep. Pick a spot on the floor and set up the pillows and blankets, dear K. I set up my blankets and the pillow next to the chess table. I laid my coat down on one of the nearby crates. Rangiku climbed onto the bed and Jin set up his blankets next to her bed. I lay down and closed my eyes. Good night, Jin. Good night, Lelich-kun, Rangiku said. Night, Ranchan, Jin said. Good night, Rangiku, I said. I was asleep within minutes only to be shaken awake. I opened my eyes to see Rangiku. She looked frightened. It was still dark out and I could hear Jin snoring. Rangiku, it's still the middle of the night, what's wrong? I asked, with a groaning tone. I had a nightmare, she said. Flashback. Nunnally, what's wrong? I asked her. I had. Nunnally sobbed. I had a nightmare. I sat up and held Nunnally. Hey, it's okay, don't cry. Your big brother's not going to let any bad things happen to you. You sleep with me tonight, okay, Nunnally? I'll keep the bad dreams away. Thank you, Lelich, she said, nuzzling into me. End flashback. I sighed. Being with her is going to be so nostalgic. Do you want to sleep with me? I asked Rangiku. She nodded meekly. I lifted up the covers for her. All right, come on. She snuggled into my chest and put my arm around her. I'm glad I asked you to stay with us, Lelich. Jin's like a friend, but in the short time you've been here you've been like a big brother to me." Rangiku then fell asleep in moments. Have a pleasant dream, Rangiku. Chapter 2, Lelouch the Chess Champ. Lelouch's POV. The next morning I decided I'd devote most of the day learning about this new power I developed. The power I had to sense spiritual pressure. When I got up there was a note hanging on the wall. It was addressed to me and it was from Jin, although it was more of a threat than a whereabouts note. It read, "Dear Lelouch, I appreciate ya help in Ranchan, but if I see you two getting cuddly again there will be consequences. Jin." I sighed and just pocketed the note. I went outside. I still had a lot of unanswered questions for myself, like my wardrobe change and how rustic the Soul Society was. I figured with all the advanced technology and dead soldiers of Britannia, even some of my own Black Knights there would be some form of scientific advancement, but everything was all woodsy and relatively peaceful. I wondered if perhaps there was some reasonable explanation for all of this, but I decided there was no point in worrying about it. My past was behind me. If I saw any familiar faces I would pretend like I didn't know them. It would be hard enough leaving Rangiku and Jin when the Soul Reaper patrol came through. Rangiku seemed like she needed some form of moral support, and Jin needed a role model of some sort. Unfortunately that's not the kind of person I could be for them. I sat down on the ground and meditated using the position Buddhist monks would take. I let out slowed, controlled breath and focused my mind. There was a flash of color. My eyes were still closed, but I seemed to be able to see another world entirely with them closed. I could see what I guessed were souls with spiritual energy. They looked like little blue and white fireballs. The closest one was within a few decameters of me. That was obviously Rangiku. As I continued to focus I could sense other spiritually empowered entities throughout the marketplace. They were relatively weak. In fact most of them were weaker than Rangiku. I focused on two spiritual pressures, one randomly weak one and Rangiku's. I noticed that there were several differences between the two souls besides just distance from me and size. If I honed in on Rangiku her soul would flash a bright reddish pink. It was impossible for me to identify the other soul. It was too weak and too far away. I opened my eyes and I lost sight of the soul world. I decided I'd try a little experiment. If I could concentrate and hone in on Rangiku then maybe I could use her as a homing beacon of sorts. I went inside the house. Rangiku was still asleep. I got out a piece of paper and wrote, "Went out to test an experiment, don't leave the house." Thanks, Lelouch. It was imperative that Rangiku stayed put. I was going to go out into the Soul Society and get myself incredibly lost. Then I would follow Rangiku's spiritual pressure back to the house to see if it was possible to identify and hone in on a particular soul. I walked slowly and tried to avoid going off the pathways. Eventually I found myself in the center of town. I stood still and concentrated. The world of souls opened to me again. I concentrated and searched for that reddish-pink aura I had identified with Rangiku earlier. After a few minutes I noticed it. It was faint, but I located the reddish-pink soul I had associated with being Rangiku's. I turned my body in the direction I detected the soul and opened my eyes. I was facing towards the left end of the markets. I proceeded in that direction, passing by the townsfolk and making my way back towards where I detected Rangiku's soul. When I got back to the forest I focused and tried to detect Rangiku again. I located the same reddish-pink soul at 45 degrees to my left. I opened my eyes and went in that direction, passing by trees and eventually came to a clearing. I looked off in the distance and just barely made out Rangiku and Jin's house. I took a good look around the area and committed it to photographic memory. I then focused on Rangiku's soul and, with my eyes closed, walked all the way back to the house. I sidestepped the lake. I made sure not to lose my footing when I passed over that dip in the plateau and made sure to take into account the fallen tree trunk that lay at the base of the house's grounds. I put my hand out, eyes still closed, and touched the front of the house. I believed myself to be equidistant from the front window and the door. I opened my eyes and I was right. I smirked, piece of cake. I heard footsteps and Rangiku came outside the house. "Oh Lelouch, you're back," she held up my message. "I got your note." I didn't leave the house, like a good girl, she curtsied. I smiled at her. That's right, you did. Thank you, Rangiku. I bent down and pat her head. Kids her age needed a morale boost like that when they do the right thing and call attention to it, so I've read. So how long have you been up for? I asked Rangiku as I walked inside. Not long, she answered. I opened one of the crates and took out an apple. You didn't see Jin on your walk, did you? She asked. I shook my head and went outside to the nearby pond and washed off the apple. I bit into it. After I swallowed, I said, "Say Rangiku, what do you know about Soul Reapers?" Not much other than what I told you yesterday, Rangiku answered. Was there something specific you wanted to know? She asked. You said the Godi was a military organization, I said, tossing the apple up and down in my hand. Do new recruits undergo training? Sorry, I don't know much about Soul Reapers. Jin knows more than I do. You can ask him when he comes home, Rangiku told me. Alright then, I said, catching the apple and taking out another huge bite. I set the apple to float in the pond and tossed my jacket aside and put myself in a push-up position on the flat ground. What are you doing? Rangiku asked me. Exercise, I responded, holding my position. Until I learn more information about the qualifications to become a Soul Reaper, I'm going to treat it like regular military training, and to do that I'll need to get in shape. My stamina and physical abilities are limited. If it wasn't for the fact that I was taking that walk at entirely my own pace, I would have been exhausted by the time I reached the front door. Can I watch? Rangiku asked me. If you want to, I said. Rangiku sat down on the ground and watched me. I still hadn't moved from my idle position. Come on, it's only push-ups, I stared at the ground. I can do this. I pushed down low to the ground and with tremendous effort pushed up. Every muscle in my body was screaming in agony. Exercise and physical ability was totally not my forte, but I wasn't going to quit. If Suzaku could become a hardened soldier, so could I. Granted, Suzaku was already an exercise nut from the first time I met him, but this is something I had to do. I did another push-up. It was destructive on my body. I pushed back down on the ground and just collapsed, panting. These things were exhausting. I chuckled to myself. If C.C could see me now, she'd probably think I'm incredibly pathetic. She'd call me a fool for trying and that I'm acting out of character. Somehow, just thinking of that immortal witch's response to my actions drove me to keep going. I pushed up with vigor. It hurt, but as I'd heard Suzaku tell me before, no pain, no gain. I pushed down and pushed back up again. I repeated this process until I had done 10 of these exhausting things, including the first 2 I did. I collapsed on the ground, panting louder than before. Ha, ha, ya look like a dog with heat stroke, Lamperouge-san, I heard Jin's voice. Oh, hello Jin. I looked at him with an antagonistic smile as I lifted my head so that my chin rested on the ground. Try and get in shape to become a Soul Reaper, eh? Jin asked me. Ain't that obvious? I asked. Jin's constant smile widened. Well, I don't know what you're doing, but yeah, ain't never gonna be a Soul Reaper doing dat. Then what do you suggest? I asked him with a serious look. Well, from what I know, Soul Reaper folk focus on a few areas of combat, plus intellectual stuff. The fighting is broken up into speed, hand-to-hand, magic spells, or Kido as they call it in practice, with your cool sword ya get called your Zanpakuto, Jin answered. I rolled over onto my back and looked at Jin upside down. Zanpakuto. It's a special weapon that Soul Reapers get that you can communicate with. It becomes your weapon and it's a part of you. Before you even think about becoming a Soul Reaper, ya got to have the spiritual pressure to manifest a Zanpakuto. So they're empathetic weapons of a sort? I asked inquisitively. I guess you could think of them like that. I really don't know much about them since I ain't a Soul Reaper myself, but I keep an ear low to the ground is all, Jin answered. He then walked out of my vision range. I turned my head and he handed something to Rangiku. Oh, pretty, she said. Jin had handed her a bright silver stone. I finally found the strength to sit up and did so. Say Lamperouge-san, how about another game of chess? Huh? Sure, but why? I asked him. To buzz round the marketplace is dat there's another chess tourney coming up. You are going to compete, aren't ya? Jin asked me. Of course I will, I said, rising to my feet and wiping the dirt off my hands. I walked over to where I had thrown my coat and put it back on. Jin and I sat in front of the chessboard. I was black, he was white. Playing against Jin was a challenge. He was rather good at the game, better than Clovis anyway, but he wasn't nearly as skilled as Schneeisel. I took one of his pawns with my knight. He responded by taking it with his bishop. I then moved my rook that had been behind my just taken knight only a turn before to the opposite end of the board. Check. Jin took my rook with his rook. I then took that rook with my queen which had been behind the just taken rook. Checkmate. Although Jin could move his king out of the row, my queen was in the only spot it could move, put it in moving distance of one of my bishops. Wow, you're good, Lelich. Rangiku clapped. Another round, Jin said, the smile having faded from his face. Jin and I played a couple more games until the sun was at its peak in the sky. He lost every one of them. After the last one he stood up and stretched. Ha, I just can't beat Yalamperush-san. His smile was back in full swing. What say we head for the marketplace? That tournament I mentioned earlier is today after all. All right, I said and got up. As I walked alongside Jin and Rangiku, I decided to try and identify Jin's soul in case the time ever came that I needed to track him down. As I concentrated though, I felt tension on my coat tail. Rangiku was grabbing onto it. She was panting. And this is why I need to be a soul reaper. Ran-chan, you okay? Jin asked her. I am fine. It's Lelich Kun's spiritual pressure again, she gasped. Sorry, I said. I then noticed Jin wasn't having any trouble. How come you're not panting? I asked. I got enough spiritual pressure that I'm not affected by yours, he smiled. I decided not to try and hone in on Jin's spiritual pressure for the moment. It seemed my concentration caused me to expel my own spiritual pressure, which affected Rangiku. I decided that the next time she and I were left alone that I would help her get used to my spiritual pressure so that we wouldn't have incidents like this. If I could practice controlling the energy I expelled, then I could be ahead of the rest of the curve when I became a Soul Reaper. Rangiku had me give her a piggyback ride the rest of the way to the market square. It wasn't any worse than when I used to carry Nunnally around when she couldn't walk. I was sweating by the time Jin, Rangiku, and I reached the market square, but I'd have to get used to feelings like that. I removed my jacket and tied it around my waist to reduce the heat circulating through my body. Jin waved me over to the booth where people were signing up for the tournament. The man behind the counter was tan with a beard and was wearing green rags with a bandana tied around his head. Ichimaru-san, I see you are here to compete again. And I haven't seen you around before, he looked at me. He's new, Jin said. Well, we're always eager to receive new challengers. Name please, the man requested. Lamperouge Lelich. I had taken notice of the culture around here in my brief time here. It was extensively Eastern in style, and both Jin and Rangiku used honorifics to refer to me, so I figured giving my last name first was the intelligent decision. My train of thought was broken when Jin pulled on my pant leg and said, off to the right about 60 degrees, near the opposite markets. I looked where he asked me and saw a group of Shinigami. They were talking with some citizens. I didn't even need to close my eyes to feel the blinding power coming from the one in the center. He had brown hair and glasses. Is that the guy who beat you? I asked Jin. Yeah, that's him, Jin dropped his accent. If I can't beat him, you have to, okay? I'll try, I said. I may not be the best soldier material, but I can damn well be a formidable chess opponent. The group of Shinigami walked towards and I sidestepped to let the brown-haired man sign his name. The companion on his left was a man with shoulder-length black hair, and the companion on his right a short, fat guy with a bald head, but arms that look like they could pull tires right off a car. His eyes, nose, and mouth looked rather small on his big head. The man who beat Jin turned to look at me. I don't believe I've seen you around these parts, he said to me, adjusting his glasses. This is my second day in Soul Society, I responded. That's some interesting attire you're wearing, he said with a small smile. Is that how you introduce yourself to someone? I folded my arms, by mocking their apparel. I wasn't mocking. It's just, very unique. What's your name? The man asked. Normally it's polite to give your name first, I responded. Ah, too true, the man stated politely, I am Eisen Sosuke. And you are? Lamperouge Lelich, I responded. Pleased to meet you Lamperouge-san, Eisen extended his hand to me. If you're good I look forward to possibly playing against you. Same to you, I said shaking his hand. I heard you beat my friend here last time and I beat him, so I'm wondering just how much of a challenge you're going to be. I beat a lot of opponents last time, who are you referring to? Eisen said to me as our hands released. Behind you, I pointed to Jin. Eisen turned around. Ah yes, you, the young prodigy, Eisen seemed to recognize Jin. You put up quite the fight last time. Dis ain't gonna be a repeat performance of last year Eisen Fukotaiko. This year, Jin held his thumb upside down, you're going down, either by me or by Lamperouge-san. We'll see about that, Eisen said and walked away. Fukotaiko. That's the Japanese honorific for vice captain. Why did Jin? I looked at Eisen as he walked away and took notice of an armband on his left upper arm. I see, so he's a member of high authority in the Go-Di. Maybe if I beat him, he could be my ticket into the Soul Reapers. It's worth a shot. The tournament was a 64-entrant tier elimination. Eisen, Jin, and I were placed far away from each other on the board, but Eisen and Jin would face off against each other first. If I got all the way to the finals I would play winner. My first match in the tournament was against a guy who was clearly an amateur. The match was over in less than 3 minutes. After he was beaten I held up my hand, snapped my fingers and said next. My second and third opponents didn't fare much better against me. They lasted a bit longer, but I had them at checkmate somewhere in between 5 and 7 minutes. My fourth match provided me with a bit of challenge and then we were at the semi-finals. I had finished warming up by this point and after a 10-minute game I was done. I then went to where Eisen and Jin were playing, since I knew I would play winner. I watched the board carefully. The rules specifically stated no outside help or suffer disqualification, but there was nothing to help. After 2 turns and careful analysis of the match from the point I started my observation I already could see how the rest of the game was going to go. Eisen would move his queen and check Jin's king. Jin would take out his queen with his pawn, to which Eisen would move his knight to check Jin's king again, to which Jin would take Eisen's knight with his king. Eisen would move his last remaining pawn and take back his queen. Jin would check Eisen's king with his rook. Eisen would take the rook with his bishop, putting it at an exact spot to check Jin's king and ultimately cause checkmate by Jin's queen, rook, and bishop. I watched things unfold precisely as I predicted them. If Eisen was this easy to read, the match wouldn't be too hard. It would be challenging, but I'd still win. I sat down at the chess table. So, you and me, just as desired, I said, cracking my knuckles and resetting the board. How did your previous matches go? With the exception of Jin, they were all just amateurs. How about you? Eisen asked. No one's really been able to hold my attention all that well. Now shall we play? I was black, so Eisen went first. I moved the pawn in front of my king on my first turn and moved my king on the second. Interesting choice, Lamperouge-san, Eisen told me. I'll tell you what I tell everyone else. If the king does not move into battle, his men won't follow, I told him. An interesting philosophy, but philosophy does not win chess, he returned. Are we taunting each other or are we playing a game? I asked. The match continued as I carefully calculated every move I made and tried to read anything I could off of Eisen. The only reason I knew how he would beat Jin was because I knew how Jin played and his moves were exactly what I would have done. Eisen was on my level. His tactics were different than mine, but he was definitely a skilled chess master. Still, I played against someone who could quite literally read my mind. Compared to that, this was child's play. I moved my pawn in front of Eisen's rook at the end of the board. He took it and I placed my bishop behind it. Eisen saw my queen ready to take his rook if he decided to take my bishop and instead moved the knight next to my bishop. I moved one of my knights to take one of Eisen's pawns, which he then took with an adjacent pawn. I backed up into the pawn with my queen and nabbed it. Eisen stared at me momentarily before moving his king one space to my left. I took a good look at the board and smirked. Say Eisen, what say we raise the stakes on this game? What are you betting? He asked. If I win, I want you to take me with you back to wherever it is the Soul Reapers reside and have me enrolled in training, I declared. I thought you might ask me at some point, Aizen folded one hand over his other. You knew I'd turn down your request if you asked plainly out of the blue, so your judgment of my character as a man of my word led you to gamble such a proposition on the outcome of the game. Very well, Lelouch Lamperouge, I accept your terms. However, what do I get if I win? What do you want? I asked. I'm not a man without honor either, Aizen. Very well then, Aizen said, if I win. He glanced around. I followed his eyes. They landed upon Rangiku. You came here with that girl, did you not? What do you want with Rangiku? I asked. If I win, I would like you and her to meet me in the nearby forest. I'm working on an experiment and you two are just the souls I need to further it, Aizen stated. How is that an equal proposition? Surely you can find specimens anywhere. What makes us so special? I asked. Experimentation on Rukonga citizens gets a little iffy with the red tape I get saddled with. You and that child are high-quality specimens for my research. I would like to gain your consent if I win this match, Aizen answered. A hand was suddenly placed on my shoulder and Jin whispered into my ear, Lamperouge-san, if ya accept this and lose, I'll castrate ya in your sleep. Just a fair warning. I don't plan to lose, so don't worry about it, I said with a dark expression, staring straight at Aizen. The stakes have risen, the game is set. I'm going to win. I believe it was your turn before this interesting conversation started, Aizen reminded me. I'm aware, I said with a friendly tone. At the same time I was discussing things with Aizen, I had been given time to carefully analyze the board. I had properly recognized the situation I was in and acted accordingly. I moved my king one square to my right. Aizen checked it. I took his bishop with my knight, knowing that he would take it with his queen and put my king back in check. I blocked with my other bishop. Aizen moved his queen away from my king. I then moved my queen up so that it was in line with his king and my bishop at the end of the board. Check. Aizen put his queen in front of his king. I moved my rook so that it was in line with my queen and Aizen's queen and king. This would be the point of the game, that I would understand Aizen's true nature as I have with many other players. Aizen had two options right now. He could move his king to either side of my queen and rook, prolonging the game, but allowing me to claim his queen. He could take my queen with his queen, which I would take my rook, put his king in check, forcing him to move it now only to bring my other rook across the board and check him again, to which Aizen's options would soon be limited and I would win. Or he could do nothing about the situation and move one of his last remaining pawns. No matter what Aizen did, the match was mine. He responded by committing to double queen sacrifice. I took his queen with my rook. He moved, I checked. He moved his king forward and to my right. I brought my rook in line with my pawn next to Aizen's king, and then Aizen moved his king above my pawn. I brought my other rook to be in line with Aizen's king. Aizen moved his king to the other side of my pawn. I moved my pawn and took back my queen. Checkmate. Aizen had no moves. He couldn't take my queen. That option was made impossible by my rook. His only other option that would have been open to him was blocked by my bishop that had been sitting in the corner for several turns. Aizen looked at the board, then back at me, and then back at the board, and then back at me. He sighed, put his finger on his king and tipped it over. The winner of the chess tournament is Lamperouge Lelouch. The host announced. I was given a trophy and a medal, and Aizen got a plaque similar to the one Jin had shown me yesterday. After all the applause and congratulations, rather after I was finally allowed to be alone, Aizen approached me. That was a marvelous game you played, Lamperouge-san, Aizen said to me. That's the first time I've ever lost at chess. Well played. Thank you. Now about our deal. I haven't forgotten and I am a man of my word, Lamperouge-san. You may accompany my squadron and I back to the Siratai, Aizen told me. Thank you, I bowed low. I was in the presence of a high-ranking military officer, so I felt the need to show respect. Lelouch Kyuyun. Rangiku ran up to me. Lelouch-kun, are you really leaving? Rangiku asked me. I nodded. My place is with the Soul Reapers. No. Stay one more night. Please. Rangiku pleaded. I bent down and pat her head. Sorry, but destiny calls and I'm not asking it to leave a message. I took the medal off my neck and gave Ranjika the trophy. Here, I told her, I have no use for trinkets and gimmicks, sell this at a pawn shop so you and Jin don't have to eat fruit washed in a nearby pond. Ranjika set the trophy down. Then I'm going to train. Train? I questioned. Ranjika nodded. I'm going to grow big and strong and I'll show up at the academy to join you someday. Ranjika seemed all fired up. I smiled at her. You do that. Who knows, maybe we'll run into each other again. I untied my jacket from around my waist and put it on. I pulled on the front to fit it better. Aizen, let's go. He, his followers, and I walked off into the sunset. Our destination, the Soul Reaper Academy. To be continued. Chapter 3, Lelouch Researches. Lelouch's POV. Aizen brought me to the Siratai and dumped me off at the Shino Academy. We parted ways and I just gave my obligatory thanks for the lift and for bringing me here. Afterwards I signed myself up and was given a uniform and a sword, and it was not a low-quality wooden or plastic replica sword either. I was given an actual, sharp-edged katana. It was about 4 feet long and had a dirt brown, cylindrical handle. The hilt was gray and the guard was silver and circular. I was told that this would be my Zanpakuto. And let me tell you, they didn't just hand it to me like they had these things in stock or something. They ripped it out from within me and that hurt, a lot. I was given a manual, a room key, an academy map and sent on my way. At least those items were taken from out of a storage bin. I used the map to find my room, entered into it and changed into my uniform. The uniform wasn't the greatest fit. The sleeves were a little baggy and the pants felt like they were falling off on me, but a tighter tying of my sash solved that problem. As I looked at the way I was dressed, I had a brief recall of the Tanbata festival I went to Suzaka with when I was a kid. That seemed like a completely different lifetime now, which it was ironically. I fastened my Zanpakuto to my waist, following the instructions in the manual I was given, and then got down to reading the thick book through. It didn't take me more than a few hours to memorize it all. Reading it taught me a great deal about the world I would be living in, but it wasn't enough, so I checked out a few books from the student library and read and memorized the contents of those as well. I learned a lot from all that reading. For starters, my Zanpakuto was essentially a part of my soul. Right now it took the appearance of just a normal sword, but as I bonded with its appearance would readily change. If I bonded with it enough, I would learn something called Shikai, which would allow me to unlock its special power. If I trained with it for a really long time, I could learn something called Bankai. Bankai was the final form of a Zanpakuto and it took 10 years to master. It was said that very few Soul Reapers ever achieved Bankai. It was a requirement if one was to become a captain, and sometimes learning Bankai could prove fatal to the learner. My research also turned up what I would learn here. Soul Reapers were masters of 4 basic arts. The first art, Zanjutsu, was one's proficiency with their Zanpakuto. Besides just being given classes focusing on communing with one's Zanpakuto, students were also taught proper form of the sword in Kendo classes where Shina and Boken were passed out so that students wouldn't be severely hurt or injured in duels. The second art was Hakuda, also known as hand-to-hand combat. Both this and Zanjutsu I figured would be the hardest for me to master considering my low stamina and low physical strength. The third art was called Hoho, the speed arts. This included learning an art called Shunpo, the flash step. Again, it would be difficult to master given my horrible physical aptitude. The last art was called Kido, or demon arts. Kido I figured I could be good at. It required memorization of long incantations and precise movement patterns. It also required precise focus and spirit particle, also known as Reishi, usage. There were 2 types of Kido, Heido, the destruction arts, and Bakudo, the binding arts. All Kido was given a number from 1 to 99. The higher the number, the more powerful, complex, draining the Kido was. According to one of the books, Kido was taught rather than listed. Kido required practice in order to fully master and understand. Also, there were 10 Kido of each type that were forbidden to be taught. To learn it was fine, but to use these Kido was forbidden by law by the Central 46 because these arts were just that powerful. The more you outlaw something, the more you are going to make people want to do it just to spite the law, I had thought when I read that particular part of the book I had been reading. I learned more than just about the arts of Soul Reapers and also about Zanpakuto. I also learned about the organization I was training to become a part of. The Godi 13 was the Soul Society's military organization. They were devoted to helping spirits move on to the afterlife and also purifying corrupted souls anew, sort of like how bleach can be used to remove stains from clothes. The Godi 13 was aptly named for its 13 squads. Each squad stood for something different. The first squad was the squad of the captain commander. The man who currently held that position, and had been doing so for nearly 8.5 centuries now, was a man by the name of Genri Yusai Shijikuni Yamamoto. People who were in his squad were important, or rather they were considered such by the other 12 divisions. The second division, currently under the captaincy of Yoriyuki Shihoin, was closely connected to the widely known Onmitsukido, also called the Stealth Force. This was due to the fact that the Shihoin noble family, one of the great noble families of the Soul Society, was closely connected to the Stealth Force. Because of this, the squad readily recruited Soul Reapers with a specialization in stealth and other skills that involved being sneaky. It was almost like the squad was trying to create an entire division devoted to assassination. The third division, currently under the guidance of Treva Hashima, was devoted to pragmatism. According to the manual, their symbol, the marigold, represented despair. They were known for getting the job done with whatever means necessary. Some squad members had gained a reputation for being cold-hearted and cruel. The fourth division was the medical division. It had been under the guidance of Captain Restu Anohana for more than 200 years. Not many Soul Reapers in that division saw much combat, but to be in that squad your proficiency had to be healing Kido and a want to work with others. Not my idea of doing my duty, but it sounded like an option regardless. The 5th division was currently guided by a man by the name of Shinji Hirako. Captain Hirako's squad was devoted mainly to Kido. Interestingly enough, this was Aizen's squad. I thought a lot about joining that division after 6 years of hard work in the academy, but I wasn't sure about joining the same division as Aizen. Call me paranoid, but something about that guy rubbed me the wrong way. The 6th division was a division known for 2 things, Soul Reapers with high proficiency in Hoho and Shunpo, and that the division had had a captain who was a member of the noble Kukaki family for quite a while now. The current head of the division was a man by the name of Jinrei Kukaki. The 7th division was under the guidance of a man with the odd name of Love Ikawa. The squad, for a long time now, was known for having high manpower, literally. Very few women were in that squad, and most of the members of the squad, especially the high-ranking ones, the lieutenant included, all were supposed to follow every male stereotype in the book according to what I read. The 8th division was almost the opposite of that. Under the captaincy of Shunsui Kiraka, the squad was known for having a lot of laid-back members, and also a lot of rather physically attractive members. Don't why it's that way, but one thing is for certain: I do not want to be in that squad unless there's no other option. I am here to serve, not look good while doing it. The 9th division sounded like the kind of division Suzaku could be in if he were here. 9th division was led by a man by the name of Kensei Maguruma. According to what I read, the 9th division sounded more and more like your typical boot camp. You were worked like a dog and you either came out a wreck or a hardened soldier after putting in some time there. The 10th division's captain was a woman by the name of Marie Carey. The division itself was known for accepting members with talents in all fields, but mastery of none. It was also known for having 2 captains, over the course of time, that were considered child prodigies that only come once every generation. The 11th division was the division known for having high-class fighters. The squad's captain was always the current Kenpeki, in other words it was the guy who was known as the generation's most powerful warrior, one without equal. The division's members were all extremely proficient at fighting in every Soul Reaper art save one, Kido. Apparently the division was all about direct fighting and Kido was considered cowardly. The 12th division was run by Kiryo Hakaifun, a woman of amazing intelligence. Her squad was known for having amazing minds. Sadly, there was nothing for them to do it with. The Godi was rather short on cutting-edge technology, which surprised me considering the kind of world I came from. Then again, Soul Society had the souls of the dead coming from all over the universe. I guess to some it would seem a downgrade and an upgrade to others. I myself belonged to the former. And finally the 13th Division seemed rather similar to the 10th from the information I was privy to about it. The only difference was that captain of the 13th Division, Jushiro Yukatake, was not only a noble, but he was also stated as being more friendlier with his subordinates, like a father to his men. Captain Akari was reportedly stricter and more apathetic towards her troops. Beyond all this, I had also learned other important facts about the Godiai, like the chain of command. It went from unseated officers, to seated officers all the way up the ranks, to the captains, to the captain commander, Central 46, the Royal Guard and something called the Soul King. No details on that last power were given, just that it existed. I figured I'd have research to do as I climbed in ranks, assuming I would. The more I read, the more it seemed like captains were like human-sized nightmare frames with how much power they were supposed to hold. I chuckled at the thought of my ability ever getting good enough for captaincy. Of course, according to the handbook, there were 3 ways to become captain. The first was to pass the captain's exam. It was an exam used to measure the potential captain's abilities and was observed by 3 captains, one of which must be the head captain himself. The second way to become captain was to be personally recommended by 6 captains and be approved by 3 of the remaining 7. To get in that way, from the sound of it, meant you either had to have a superb reputation, or be really good at sucking up to authority. Still, from reading the Godiai's history, if that had ever happened, it was evident that the incompetent captains were either discharged or killed in action. Also, what I had learned was that there were 3 types of spirit particles, Reishi, Ryuryoku and Ryatsu. Reishi was free spirit particles in the air. Everything in the Soul Society was made of Reishi. In other words, all matter was also potential energy. An odd design for the afterlife, but no doubt a convenient one, I suspected. Ryuryoku was spiritual power, or the amount of force a soul could exert when utilizing Reishi or spiritual energy. The final type, Ryatsu, was spiritual pressure. This was the energy built up inside souls and were especially abundant in Soul Reapers. My Ryatsu was what made Rangiku collapse a few times. However, according to the material I was reading, Captain Class Ryatsu made my Ryatsu the equivalent of comparing Suzaku's Lancelot with an old-fashioned heavy armored tank. There was only so much information I could be privy to at my current rank as a student. I could only learn more by becoming useful to the Godiai and becoming a full-fledged Soul Reaper. According to the guidebook, training took 6 years normally. Of course, first I'd have to pass my entrance exam, which would be tomorrow. There was no reading material on it, which didn't surprise me. What would be the point? If you were in, you were in. If you failed, you failed. There would be no point of letting students, and potential students, have access to materials pertaining to the exam. If they did, that would be cheating. A thought in the back of my mind nagged me to use my geese to learn more about the exam, maybe even rig it so that I would pass it no matter how badly I embarrassed myself, but I discarded the thought. I would not use my geese ever again. It was a tool that served me well in life and corrupted me to the point where I had to make the ultimate sacrifice to wash all the blood off my hands. Even now I think some of that blood lingers. I would work hard and honestly to become a Soul Reaper. I don't know why I still had the geese. I should have lost it. I don't want it anymore. Some would say there was a reason that I still have it, but it's a curse. A curse I would hide and go on to my next life with no one else the wiser. The room I was given was a single-person bedroom, barren of all objects save a bookshelf, which I stacked with the books I checked out of the academy library, a bed, which upon testing, was rather comfortable compared to how I had slept yesterday, and low-rising wooden table with a cushion placed near it, obviously to be used for studying and doing bookwork, I assumed. It was still midday, so I decided to take a look around the area, see what the Soul Reaper life would have in store for me for the next 6 years. I acted like I was going to pass, but there was no guarantee I would. This was unlike taking an exam at school at Ashford. At a school you'd be taught some material, take some notes, study them and take a test based on it. This was different. I had no idea what would be expected of me in the least. In all my years of living, never once did I feel so out of control of my own fate. Even before I had the geese I could always make some form of prediction of my destined future, but not this time. This time I would be going in blindly. I could desire to pass the exam tomorrow with every fiber of my being, but fate did not have to be so kind. In fact, I wasn't owed anything from the afterlife given my actions. Let this be the only time I need to face such a daunting task, I thought to myself. As I took a stroll around the area, I saw students laughing, walking, and talking with each other. I was reminiscent of my days in Ashford Academy. I imagined that if I passed the exam that things could be similar to how they once were. I shook my head slowly and discarded the thought. I'm not here to make friends or socialize. I'm here to become a soldier in order to protect others too weak to protect themselves and to start anew. I will continue to wash away the blood that has stained my hands. As I had made half a loop around premises, a voice called out to me. Worried about the exam tomorrow? I looked to my right where the voice had come from. Leaning against a support beam was a woman with brown eyes and long black hair tied in a ponytail. She was dressed in the regular Soul Reaper uniform, but was wearing a red vest, signifying her as one of the female instructors of the academy. She looked older than me. People aged slower here in the Soul Society from what I'd read, so it was impossible to tell anyone's biological age, but physically I'd say she couldn't be old than 26. You can tell? I questioned. It's easy to tell the newcomers and the ones who are worried, she said with a smug smile and her arms folded. Their spiritual pressure leaks everywhere and it fluctuates to reflect their inner apprehension. You're the third person I've stopped that I've taken notice showing such signs. I had no cause to argue with the teacher of the academy, but I didn't want to get friendly either, so I just turned my head and said nothing. Boy, you're a real go-getter, aren't you? The teacher said. Loosen up, maybe get something to eat. Being all tensed up like you are is just going to make things harder for you tomorrow. What's your name, by the way? Lelich, Lamperouge Lelich, I responded. I had read that this place was more like feudal Japan, therefore honorifics and giving one's surname first were common here. I'm Emily, Rox Emily, she introduced herself. So Lelich, how do you like your potential living environment? Seems nice enough, I answered. A thought clicked in my mind and I realized I had a golden opportunity to ask some questions and get some answers. I may not be able to learn anything about the entrance exam, but I knew the perfect way to ease the inner tension I had. I would put my faith in the one thing that had always been a boon to me, probability and statistics. I turned my head back towards the teacher and put on a smile. Sensei, approximately how many students that come to the academy every year pass the entrance exams? Well, your attitude changed on a dime, she chuckled to herself. She folded one arm under her butts and put her elbow on her wrist while she scratched her chin with the side of her index finger. Let's see, we get about 1,000 to 2,000 students every year. I'd say about 4 out of 5 students pass the exams. Good odds to start with, I told myself. Where do you typically get most of the students that come to the academy? I asked. Well, let's see, Rox Sensei looked up at the sky again to think. I'd say that for every 100 students that arrive here that a majority of them come from the Rukanga. How many would you say? I asked. Ah, a numbers man are you? She asked with a wide smile. She went back to her thinking pose. Let's see. If I had to make an estimate, I'd say maybe 90% of all of our students come from the Rukanga districts, and for those that do, I'd say the bulk of them come from the lower districts. Exact numbers if you would, Sensei, I said. Rox Sensei hummed to herself as she did mental math. Well, out of 100 recruits I'd say 80 are going to pass, and of those 80 that 8 will be from noble families, 50 will be from Upper Rukanga and the rest from Lower Rukanga. I'm from Rukanga Sector 64. Does it matter which region? I asked. Not really, it's all the same dividend, Rox Sensei answered. Well, I'd say that out of the amount of people we get from your district, we really only get 4 out of every 9 that pass. Great, so we're back to 50-50 where I started, and to make matters worse, I'm down even lower than before. My cheerful mood was waning. However, your spiritual pressure is rather abundant from someone of your region. In fact, if I didn't know any better, I'd put you on par with some of the lower-ranking nobles, Rox Sensei stated. I cupped my chin. That does make some sense. More than I'd like it to, actually. Your Ryotsu seems to have calmed down, Lelich, I heard Rox Sensei say. I looked at her with a slightly confused expression. I don't know what you're thinking, personally I don't care, but I want you to know that I think you'll do fine tomorrow. Take it from someone who has been teaching here for 7 years. If I think I see a well-based recruit, you can be sure your exam is as good as passed. I'm not one to place my faith in the promises and words of others, I said coldly, but I appreciate your vote of confidence for what it's worth. My Ryotsu could be so powerful it could trounce the head captain, but my stamina and endurance are pitiful. I haven't had much time to train. My eyebrows converged to a resolved gaze. I think I'll get something to eat and prepare for tomorrow. Good luck, Lelouch, she told me. I walked on without saying a word. I had something to eat, went back to my room and prepared for tomorrow. If Suzaku and C.C had seen me, they would have been pointing and laughing. I looked really pathetic trying to physically prepare myself with push UPS, sit UPS, and stretches. By the time I was done I was completely drained, and by the look of the analog clock on my wall I had only been doing things for less than a half an hour. Damn it, I thought as I panted, this is getting me nowhere. There has to be something else I can do to prepare for tomorrow that doesn't involve feeling like I'm killing myself. I sat up and went over to my bookshelf and got my student manual. I memorized all the basic information, but what I needed were pointers and details. Also, it never hurt to double-check and make sure I had my facts straight, not when so much was at stake. I flipped open to a page about Zanpakuto. It discussed Jizen, the position that Soul Reapers used for meditation in order to talk with their Zanpakuto. I decided to give it a try. It was worth a shot. I sat down in a cross-legged position with my Zanpakuto in my lap and meditated. I tried clearing my mind and emptying it, but all that would come to me were haunting images of my life. I left Nunali weeping over me. I watched as Suzaku plunged the sword I gave him into me. It was a montage of my life and all moments filled with blood, tears and darkness. My eyes flew open and I bent my torso forward and panted. That was not how communication was described in the least. If anything, all I did was haunt myself with memories of the past. Memories I was trying to forget. I looked at the clock only to realize the sun had already set. That's odd, I said and got to my feet. Before I had sat in Jizen the sun wasn't even setting, but now all of a sudden it was pitch black out. I looked at the clock on the wall. Is it that late already? I asked aloud to no one. I shook my head slightly and picked up my Zanpakuto off the ground to put it back in its scabbard. As I did, I noticed it had changed. Well, it was either that or my eyes were playing tricks on me in the darkness. The guard had changed. It was now thin and rectangular. Other than that, nothing much had changed. Did I make some progress after all? I wondered. I felt too tired to think on it, and since it was late I put my Zanpakuto under my bed, took off my socks and sandals and went to sleep. Tomorrow I would take my entrance exam and hopefully I would pass and become a Soul Reaper. To be continued. Chapter 4, Lelouch's Examination. Lelouch's POV. I woke up the next morning and refastened my Zanpakuto to my waist and headed out to the field marked on the academy map to take the entrance exam. I saw a lot other students there. I did a head count. Including myself, there were 2,130 students here to enter the academy. Judging from the sun's position in the sky and the time of year, I figured it couldn't be later than 9 a.m. right now. I took notice of the several tables and chairs strewn about the field, but everyone was standing about. I didn't want to stand out, so I stood in one place as well. As I stood there, waiting for things to get started, someone called out to me, "Hi there." I turned to see a girl with long, thick dark blue hair and matching colored eyes waving in my direction. There was a white lotus flower in her hair and she had a bust in between the size of C.C's and Collins. I turned around, but there was no one behind me. "No, silly, I'm waving at you," she said. I turned back to face her and she smiled brightly. "Hiya." "Hello to you," I responded. She laughed. "I'm Mindra, Latviana Mindra." "What's your name?" "Lelouch, Lamperouge Lelouch," I answered. I added, "You're awfully chipper this early in the morning." She laughed again. "It has been my childhood dream to become a Soul Reaper. I've lived in Rukonga for 17 years now, and finally I left my drunk mom and my abusive dad and walked all the way to the Siratai on foot." She held up her arm and flexed. "I may not look it, but I'm really good at physical activities." "Are you now?" I asked with a disbelieving smirk. So what's your story, Lelich-kun? She asked. Not much of a story really, I said. I've been here a grand total of 3 days, including today. Yesterday I just happened to meet one of the vice captains, Aizen, who was in my district, and I made a bet that if I could beat him at chess he would take me to the Siratai to become a Soul Reaper. Get out. Mindra was shocked. You met the lieutenant of 5th Division Aizen Sosuke? And not only that, you beat him at chess? Oh, what I wouldn't have given to have been there with you. What's the big deal? What's so great about Aizen? I asked. I wish I hadn't said that. Mindra started to go through a whole list. I stopped paying attention. I would form my own opinions of the man, and besides that, the ceremony was starting. A man with long blonde hair, wearing a captain's haori, walked up onto the platform in front of where everyone was gathered. Good morning. What's hanging? He spoke with an accent that reminded me of an old Japanese dialect. And he also had quite the overbite. My name's Hirako Shinji. I'm captain of the 5th Division. I've been asked to survey you all today and see in all new recruits. Before we begin, I have a few words I want to say. Hirako Taiko cleared his throat and began to talk. Becoming a Soul Reaper means starting over. Once you make the decision to become a Soul Reaper, whatever life you had in the Rokanga is over and done with. If you're a noble, then prepare to have double the responsibilities you already have. Whether you live or die depends upon your actions and your superior's orders. Anyone who isn't entirely sure about their decision can vacate the premises now. My vice captain, Aizen Sosuke, will be more than happy to escort you back to your home via caravan. Hirako Taiko took a pause for anyone who was intimidated by his words. I wasn't. Then again, I had nothing to lose to begin with. A few did leave. I watched the crowd decrease in size by 24. Very well then, Hirako Taiko continued after Aizen Fukutaiko left. I'd like to welcome all you potential recruits to the Godai, but first there's the matter of the entrance exams. As you may have noticed, we have tables and chairs littered about the field. Behind me on the platform here is a stack of exams. These exams will be the first things added into your records as students of the academy, provided you can finish them in allotted amount of time. We need people that can be diligent and reliable, and so getting this exam done on time is a test of that. When you finish, come up and hand it to me. If you don't finish the exam in the allotted time given, you're axed. Hirako Taiko threw his thumb over his shoulder. No questions asked. It is simply, so sorry, goodbye, see you again next year. There was a heavy silence over the crowd. To break it, Hirako Taiko clapped his hands. All right, chop chop, let's move it, people. I took my seat at a table and was handed an exam as the administrators came around passing them out to everyone. When everyone had an exam, Hirako Taiko spoke again. All right everyone, you have 1 hour to complete this exam. There is to be no talking, no looking at other people's exams, and no suspicious activity. Anyway, let the countdown for the hour begin starting, now. I took a look at the exam. The first thing I did was write my name at the top. Secondly, I took a look at how many questions there were. They were all open-ended and there were 100 of them. All right, no pressure, Lelich. You can do this. I told myself. Let's see here, question 1. 40 minutes later. Done, I said to myself, putting my writing utensil down. The test was more like a psychological profiling, plus a background check. Some questions even made me feel like I was filling out a survey for the Godai itself. Regardless, I was finished. I pushed back in my chair, stood up and went to go hand my exam to Hirako Taiko. There was a short line leading up to the top of the platform. When I got to the front, I handed Hirako Taiko my exam. Okay, let's have a look-see here. Lamparog Lelocher. It's pronounced Lamperouge Lelich, I correctly calmly. Oh man, I sympathize with your captain, and all of your future senseis, kid, Hirako Taiko sighed. Anyway, let me take a look at the rest of this. He paused when he got to the third page. Are you serious? Is there a problem? I asked kindly. You beat Sosuke in a game of chess. He asked me disbelievingly. Don't believe me? Ask him yourself when he comes back, I retorted. Nah, I know he went to the tournament the other day with a couple of my other officers. Didn't know he brought anyone back. Not that I particularly care, Hiroko Teiko responded. He continued to look over my exam. Alright Lelich, I think that'll do it, he said when he finished. Okay, so what now? I asked. Hiroko Teiko pointed off the platform towards the side I didn't come up from. Go the mess hall and get something to eat. We'll be testing everyone's spiritual stamina next, so we need everyone to eat. When he said that, I realized that I hadn't been hungry all morning, or yesterday for that matter. Surprised? He asked. You must not have been a soul for that long. Yeah, it's pretty common knowledge to people who are around long enough, so we don't write it down in the manuals and such. You see, now that you're a soul, you only need to eat to refuel your spirit energy. You never get hungry and you never get the bloated feeling of being full either, at least when you're not appeasing your hunger anyway. In any case, get going, you're holding up the line. Alright, excuse me, I said and followed my instructions. When I got into the mess hall, that girl Mindra flagged me down. So as not be rude, I got my food and sat down with her. Ah, you passed. I'm happy about that, she told me. How long have you been here? I asked. Oh, I finished my exam like really early, she said, waving her fork around with a piece of meat on the end of it. I was done in like 20 minutes. So next they test our stamina, I heard, I said as I spooned some peas. Yeah, I wonder how they do that. Mindra whirled her fork in her plate and stared up at the ceiling. Well, we might as well eat while we can. We only have a little less than 20 minutes before time is up for the other students, I said. Mindra agreed. The Sirtai had really good food. Or rather, it was better than what I had to eat back when I was with Rangiku and Jin. I was indoors and there was no clock hung up on the wall somewhere, so I couldn't try and determine how quickly time was passing. Eventually though, Hiroko Teiko entered the mess hall and made an announcement. Alright recruits, finish eating and then head out entrance number 2 and go to the dirt field. However, I would like to speak to one person in particular. Where is Lamprouge Lelich? I nearly choked. I didn't like standing out. Wow, Lelich, can you? I didn't let Mindra finish and just got up from my seat and headed over to Hiroko Teiko. My legs were shaking. I was wondering if I was about to be axed or something. As I neared Hiroko Teiko, he asked the rest of the students to clear out. When I finally got to him, he held out his hand. Put her there, he told me. Huh? I was confused. What? Shake my hand, he told me. Sure, I said and shook it, but, what, why? I sent a hell butterfly to Sosuke about the chess match. It's the first time he's ever been beaten by anyone at anything. He let go of my hand and scratched his head. Okay, maybe that's not entirely true. There's this guy Urahara Kisuke, who's the 3rd seed of the 2nd division, who has a pretty heated chess record with Aizen, and those two go on and off with wins and losses. He stopped scratching his head and looked at me with a prideful smile, but for someone who is not even a Soul Reaper yet to have the brain power to defeat a lieutenant, you've gotta be some kind of prodigy or something. Please, I said humbly, I'm just a low-level recruit with a big brain. I'm no prodigy. Well, whatever, you're okay in my book for beating down my lieutenant. He can be such a pain sometimes. He slumped over, but quickly erected himself. Sorry, that was a bit unprofessional. This conversation stays between us, got it? Sure, no problem, I said with a kind look. Right, good on you, Lelich. Hiroko Teiko pat my shoulder enthusiastically. Anyway, let's get out to the dirt field. I nodded and followed him out to the field where the other recruits were gathered. Hiroko Teiko took to the opposite end of the field and then leapt up on top of the wooden fence. He stood on the fence with perfect balance. No, I realized, taking a closer look, he's not standing on the fence, he's standing on air, pure air. Can all Soul Reapers do that? If so, what type of art is that? Alright recruits, Hiroko Teiko said, we're going to test your stamina. I'm going to stand here and watch while you all run from one side of the field to the other. This exercise will be the same length as the last time. 1 hour. Before we begin, does anyone have any questions? I raised my hand. Physical activities were my Achilles heel. I had to be certain about something. Yes, Lelich. Hirako Teiko called me by name. You didn't mention what we have to do to pass this part of the test, I said. You're right, I didn't, he smirked. Something about the way said that made it sound like he didn't intend to tell us. Right then, any more questions? No one said anything. Okay then, begin. A lot of recruits took off in sprints. I jogged. I was going to pace myself. I was not going to kill myself over this. With no objective given, no number of laps to be completed, no how long you had to last, no anything, I decided that I'd just do my best to keep myself from falling over flat on my face. 20 minutes later. The jogging was starting to take its toll on me. Students continued to rush by me in either direction, still going strong. I was starting to sweat and breath hard. I slowed my pace down to a speed walk. I know Hirako Teiko said to run, but I just couldn't keep at the pace I was. I hoped I wouldn't be noticed in the crowd of people. As I walked, I looked at the other students. I saw some muscle-bound guys flying past me. I saw Mindra pass me a couple of times. She was really fast, faster than some of the guys. Hi Lelich-kun, bye Lelich-kun. She said to me once as she passed by me. I just let out an exasperated breath and kept in my strides. 20 minutes later. I was sweating so much now I was certain any minute now I was going to hit the ground and pass out. My body felt like my heart was beating in my brain. I was reminded of how Violet Inu used to push me hard in gym class when I was under the influence of my father's geese. I saw a couple of students passed out on the ground. Some of them were the ones that had sprinted back and forth starting in the beginning. Mindra passed me a few more times, waving to me as she did. I rolled my eyes a couple of times. She was such a show-off. 18 minutes later. I could barely move. I wasn't about to stop moving, but I couldn't run, I couldn't speed walk, hell I could barely keep my legs going, but I was determined to keep moving. I refused to fall to the ground. I read once in an old military manual that quitters were considered dead. Everyone that was lying on the ground was going to get axed for sure. To take my mind off my body, I did a head count. There were 37 people lying down on the ground. I never felt so relieved when Hirako Teiko bellowed, "All right everyone, you can stop scrambling around." I was so relieved that when I stopped moving I fell to the ground and felt pride in my accomplishment. All that last-minute exercise was good for something, I laughed to myself. All right, I'm going to come around to you all. If I tap you on the shoulder, you're out of here. My vice captain won't be back for a while, so the administrators will be guiding you back to wherever you live, Hirako Teiko said. I lay on the ground breathing. I don't care if what I did got me into the Godai or not. To last a full hour felt like an accomplishment to me. In your face, Suzaku, you exercise freak. I grinned and grinded my right hand into the dirt. I felt Hirako Teiko's shadow pass over me a couple of times. I was totally relaxed until I heard shouting. What? Why did you just tap me on the shoulder? It was Mindra. Why else? I don't think you're ready, Hirako Teiko told her. What the hell is that supposed to mean? I was the best one out there. Mindra argued. Look, I got a couple more rounds to make. We don't make appeal cases to exiles. Shoo. Get lost. I heard an angry scream from Mindra followed by the sound of something landing on the ground. Everything's spinning, I heard her groan. Let that serve an example to the rest of you. This is what happens to people who argue with captains and lose their temper, Hirako Teiko stated. I wished I wasn't so pathetic that I could get up from the ground and see what had occurred, but my body wouldn't respond at all. I lay there, motionless, for a few more minutes before Hirako Teiko looked down at me. Learning how to become a doormat, Lelich. I just groaned. Can you move your arm at least? He asked. What for? I groaned. You want to get to the next event, don't you? Or are you dropping out? Hirako Teiko asked me. Ugh, I grunted. I forced myself to move my arm. I flopped it on the ground a few times before it got in contact with Hirako Teiko's hand. He helped me to my feet. Oh, man, you look pale. Guess it's a good thing you get to eat before the next test, Hirako Taeko told me. I think I need a nap more than I need food, I thought to myself. Alright everyone, get to the mess hall and get something to eat, Hirako Taeko told everyone. He let go of my hand. I took one step and practically hit the ground again. Hirako Taeko couldn't help but laugh at the sorry state I was in. Okay, maybe I shouldn't have gloated. Man, you are really drained, Hirako Taeko chuckled. I groaned. Want me to help you to a seat? He asked. I'd appreciate it, I moaned. Alright, come here then, he hoisted me up by the neckline and let my feet drag as he walked. I'm only doing this for ya cause I think you got a fighting chance. I could tell you were really killing yourself out there. Your spiritual pressure was practically gone by the 40-minute mark. The fact that you didn't give up shows your determination, and here at the GoDI we value people like that. Say, as long as you're being nice to me, I said, mind telling me why that blue-haired girl didn't make it? I mean, she was really good. Hirako Taeko sighed before answering, the whole point of this exercise was for me to get a feel for everyone's spiritual pressure. As a captain I can keep track of multiple weak spiritual pressures. You've got a pretty fair amount for a newcomer, but yours burned out rather quickly. Of course, with training that can easily change. That blue-haired girl didn't have any. It doesn't take any spiritual pressure for a Zapakuto to be forcefully materialized. We just rip a part of your soul out and turn it into a sword. However, to become a full-fledged Soul Reaper and learn Soul Reaper arts you need to have some spiritual pressure. All of her running was pure physical prowess. No matter how good she is, we can't accept someone like that into the GoDI. What's going to happen to her? I asked. Same as all the other rejects, Hirako Taeko answered. I got the feeling that he wasn't going to go into detail. We reached the mess hall and he plopped me down in a seat. My body, all on its own, slumped forward and my head hit the table. I'll get food for the both of us. Man, are you out of it? After a few minutes of being in my seat, exhausted, Hirako Taeko brought me some food. He didn't sit with me. He went to mingle with the administrators. After a few more minutes I picked my head up and ate what he brought me. I was finished eating and felt re-energized long before the next event was called. I was really hoping it wouldn't be another physical activity. Hirako Taeko led us to a large, indoor dojo and had those of us that remained sitting up against the door. Alright everyone, let me start by saying congratulations on making it this far. For those of you who now remain, we have determined that you do have what it takes to become a Soul Reaper. A bunch of people cheered. I'm coming around with scraps of special parchment. Depending on the flow of your spiritual energy and level and control of your spiritual pressure, your curriculum level will be determined. If your parchment is red, you're a rank 1. Rank 2 is blue and rank 3, the highest rank, is green. Hirako Taeko began passing out the papers. Don't worry if your paper stays white for a while. The process can take a few minutes for some. He handed me mine and I grasped it. Nothing seemed to be happening at first, but then I started to see color bleed into the paper. It was so surreal watching the paper change color from my spirit energy. I've never believed in real magic. I always chalked such illusions up to parlor tricks. I knew the explanation behind what I was dealing with, but watching it happen was a sensation I cannot describe in words. The color was dark, practically black. I was about to call Hirako Taeko over to see what this meant when he opened his mouth to make another announcement. Oh, I forgot to mention. If your paper doesn't turn any of the 3 colors I mentioned, it means your spiritual power is too chaotic for us to teach you how to be a Soul Reaper. I swallowed and looked at the paper. Changed MU, I looked at it. If I became a liability, I had an awful feeling what awaited me. I'd be taken to a small dark room and I'd be eviscerated. My career would be over before it would even begin. As I panicked, I noticed the color begin to change. It looked like a dark green, but it changed to navy and then lightened to a light, sky blue. The color changing process was long and slow and it was very unnerving. When Hirako Taeko came to get my scrap of paper, he saw the blue color. Rank 2, I suppose that makes sense given your stamina issue. I watched 3 people led away after the whole ordeal. I sighed and was thankful that I was not with them. All right, those of you who remain, follow me. We're going to the last part of the exam. Pass this and you'll be allowed to stay at the academy, Hirako Teiko told us. We were led back to the original field we were in when we started the exam. The tables and chairs had been cleared away. In their places there were blocks of stone set up all over the place. These blocks of stone are made up of quality stone. It's a special kind of rock only found in deposits around the Soul Society. They have a similar reishi composition to hollows, therefore they will react to your Zanpakuto. However, your sword strikes must be precise and controlled. If the stone block does not dissolve into reishi, as a normal hollow would when it's defeated, then you fail and will be asked to leave. This is the test that very little people fail. I'm going to come around and put my hand on your head. When I do, you are to get up. Hirako Teiko pointed to a small wooden, overturned orange-colored crate. Go over to that crate in whatever manner you choose, select your target and attack it. There is no right or wrong way of doing this, but if you do not manage to dissolve your target in one successful attack, you fail. Before I start picking people though, any volunteers? No one volunteered. Alright then, let's get started. I waited patiently for my turn, but at the same time took a careful look around at the potential students that went before me. I took notice that those that rushed to the orange crate made shallow cuts and didn't always succeed. I also took notice that anyone who cut through the center of the stone block succeeded in wiping it out. I then felt a sudden pressure on my head. It was my turn. I got up and sauntered over to the orange crate. I looked around for a target and honed in on it. I examined it carefully and put my hand on my sword and drew it out. With all the speed I had, I sprinted over to the block with my sword held in both hands high over my head. As I neared the stone, I angled my strike 90 degrees and then hacked with a horizontal slash. I cut precisely through the center of the block and sliced it completely in half. It dissolved as the top came clean off. I gained my balance. Took a few deep breaths and then put my Zanpakuto away. Very good, return to your seat, Shinji told me. I did so without question. Of the 2,130 of us who arrived at the start, only 1,576 of us remained. Rox-sensei wasn't far off when she said that 80% wound up becoming academy students. All of us who remained were presented with a class roster sheet. Our studies would begin in 3 days. Until then we had time to do whatever we liked, we just couldn't leave the academy grounds without an escort. We were also given an allowance of 100 gon. Our allowance would be renewed at the beginning of every month. I went to the academy shop and bought some notebooks, writing utensils, and a strongbox. I was also given a few textbooks for my classes, free of charge. What was left of my allowance, 58 gon, I put in my strongbox. I also began going over my textbooks until it got dark out. I was about 2 chapters into the one on Kido and its uses when there was a knock on my door. It was Hirako Teiko. I couldn't understand what a captain was doing at a student's dormitory. Hey Lelich, what's up? He asked. Hirako Teiko, not to be rude, but don't you have duties you should be taking care of? What with your lieutenant gone to bring the rejects to their homes? I asked. What do you think I've been doing ever since I left? Hirako Teiko looked to the side. Anyway, I was going over the records of today's recruits with some of the other captains and yours just happened to catch Akari Teiko's eye. If you don't know who she is, she's the 10th Division captain. I know who Akari Teiko is, I stated. What happened? Well, I mentioned I met you and you know, there was a lot of talking and well, I'll be blunt. You definitely lack the skills needed to graduate, but what can I say? You've certainly become a popular recruit amongst the captains. In fact, Shiho and Teiko asked if I could come find you. She and the other captains I was with actually want to meet you. It's an opportunity of a lifetime. What do you say? Recognition? Just because of what's on my written exam? Something didn't sit right with me. I can't be the only recruit that the captains find interesting. Why am I special? Pardon my disrespect. Hey, it's cool, Hirako Teiko said, and to be honest there are a bunch other recruits that have the captain's eyes. We still have our eye out for this year's jack of all trades prodigy. He began scratching the back of his neck, but like I told you earlier, my vice captain has a reputation for having a brilliant mind. The fact that you beat him in chess is a feat we have not seen in the academy ever. So I'm getting recognized because of a unique backstory? I questioned. There are other factors, but I'm not at liberty to speak about those, Hirako Taeko told me. Like I said, you still have to go through the academy, but you've kind of made your mark already. Anyone who can knock my second down a peg or two is okay in my book. I wouldn't be down here if the other captains weren't interested. It wasn't my idea in the first place, like I said. It's not going to be a wild party or anything. We're just hanging around doing paperwork and going over files. Heck, if Anohana Taeko decides to show up, maybe you could get your medical examination 2 days early. Right, I wasn't sure if I should accept. I thought about things in my head. It was a golden opportunity. I could leave my mark, put my foot in the door, and in 6 years I'd have the doors open for me. You know, if you do show up, there's a likely chance you could get a seated officer's position right out of the academy. Hirako Taeko always seemed to forget the most vital pieces of information on purpose and then add them moments later. His statement was like music that never sang a sweeter melody to my ears. If I was going to be in the Godai, I could really only make a difference by being high up. I would help protect the weak. People like Rangiku and Jin, and people like that girl Mindra who didn't have any spiritual pressure at all. Lead the way, I told Hirako Taeko. Great, the other captains are gonna love meeting you. Hirako Taeko walked out of the doorway and I shut the door and locked it before putting my room key in my pocket. Yes, this is okay. I don't plan to manipulate anyone. I'll drop suggestions, I'll be a social person. It's not sucking up to authority. They want to meet me. I rationalized the decision. Well, here we are, Hirako Taeko said as we stood outside a lounge. He pushed open the door. You coming in, or are you going to stand outside until the sun goes completely down? I took a deep breath, gathered my wits, and walked inside. To be continued. Chapter 5, Lelouch and the Captains. Lelouch's POV. I walked into the lounge. Hirako Taeko led me over to a side room. We had a brief wordless argument over who would go in first. He was the captain, so it was courtesy that I let him in, but at the same time I was a guest. It took a rising of his spiritual pressure to get me to cooperate. Inside the side room there was a large round table with several people sitting around it wearing captain's hairs and a few without. Going clockwise, starting from my left, there was a captain with dark skin and short purple hair. She had gold-colored eyes and a rather large chest. There was a younger girl sitting next to her, a little farther away from the table, with short, flat raven black hair that came down only as far as her earlobes. She was notably flat. The only reason I was able to tell she was a girl was because of the way her hair was styled. It would probably be more obvious once she opened her mouth, hopefully. Well, at least not all of women in this place have to have breasts as big as watermelons. With the exception of Rangiku, which was understandable because she looked like a child, practically every woman I had come across had rather large breasts, save this one. Not that it mattered in the slightest. It was just an observation. To the right of the two women was a man wearing an umbrella hat with a mustache growing in. He was wearing a pink coat around his haori, which seemed odd, but I wasn't about to question a captain's sense of aesthetics. It would seem rude even if my intentions were harmless. In between him and the other captain in the room was an empty cushion, which I assumed was Hirako Taeko's seat, and closest to my right was a woman with long, dark brown hair, the kind of hue seen on semi-sweet chocolate. Her hair came straight down behind her back. She was wearing makeup, some eyeshadow, and red lipstick to be precise, much in contrast to the other two women here, and her own chest much rivaled that of the other female captains. Next to that woman, right behind her like the dark-skinned captain's assistant was another woman. She was also slightly well endowed. She dark green hair like that of pine needles. I took note of the split ends she had and that her hair was about half the length of the captain she was sitting next to. She was wearing the same kind of armband Aizen had been, so I could safely assume that she was a vice-captain. Let me introduce you, Lelouch. Hirako Taeko put his arm around the backs of my shoulders as he gestured to everyone else in the room. This is Captain Shiho and you're Yuaki of Squad 2, he gestured to the dark-skinned captain. Hiya. Shiho and Taeko grinned, showing her teeth. My first impression, between her enthusiastic greeting, bright smile, and folded I can make a pretty accurate guess that Shihoin Teiko to be woman that likes to enjoy herself, rather amiable, and very informal. Captain Kiraku Shunsui of Squad 8. Hirako Teiko gestured to the pink-coated man. It's a pleasure. Kiraku Teiko nodded and tugged on the brim of his umbrella hat slightly. My first impression, taking into consideration on his rather calm greetings, the nonchalant way he had his haori draped over him, plus the alcohol on his breath I could smell from here, I can gauge that Kiraku Teiko is very laid back, would rather party than work, but if push came to shove he's not to be trifled with in the least. There's an old saying about how sometimes the maddest cow can be the wisest of the herd. It seems very fitting in this case. And this fine woman here is Akari Mari, of Squad 10, he gestured to the brown-haired woman. Greetings. She replied. My first impression, based on her articulate greeting, her decision to wear makeup and her stern gaze, I can accurately estimate that Akari Teiko is a woman of high professionalism, shows no external fear and she's seen enough atrocities that her soul has been scarred many times over. Still I can also see that behind her first layer that she shows to newcomers into her life that she can be a rather pleasant person. Who are the others then? I asked, curious. Well, that lovely lady over there, he gestured to the green-haired woman, is Homura Yuna, Akari Teiko's vice-captain. Nice to meet you, she said looking over to me. My first impression, her quiet and shy demeanor shows that she doesn't like getting involved with others. The fact that she's here shows her dedication and loyalty to her captain. The lack of care in her physical appearance, in comparison to her captain's, shows that she is comfortable walking in her captain's shadow. Her accomplishments become her captain's and she prefers fading into the background. However, her attentive focus and rigid posture show that she is quite capable for her position. Okay, so who's the other? I asked Hirako Teiko. Don't know. She came here with Yoriyuki. I don't know her name. He scratched his head. Based on his informality with Shihoin Teiko, and also adding my own interactions with Hirako Teiko, I've come to identify him as a man who prefers not to be caught doing the mundane. He'd rather be in the middle of something exciting, unusual or interesting than standing around answering questions or being at today's entrance exam. Still, the way he carries himself and how he handled Mindra earlier suggests he may have some anger issues or some pent-up stress. The source of which is currently unknown to me. He also seems to prefer speaking casually with those of equal or lesser rank unless it's to introduce someone, which shows that his level of professionalism only extends into actually being in the middle of an assignment. Shihoin Teiko gestured to the girl next to her. So iPhone, aren't you going to say hello to our guest? Hello, the girl responded rather plainly. Is that your full name? I asked curiously. Just so iPhone? No last name. Is there a problem with that recruit? She asked me. With the way she bit down on the word recruit made me seem like she demanded respect of those beneath her. My first impression, considering she's not wearing a lieutenant's armband and the fact that Hirako Teiko didn't identify her as Shihoin Teiko's lieutenant, I can only assume that she has some form of connection to her captain that extends outside the Godi I-13, possibly into nobility. The fact that she's here shows not only her loyalty to her captain like Homura Fukuteiko, but also whatever bond her and her captain must share. So iPhone, senpai, what's your rank? I asked. I'm not directly in line with the 2nd Division. I'm Shihoin Teiko's direct subordinate and lead bodyguard. She said proudly. So iPhone, there's no reason to bite off the poor kid's head. Shihoin Teiko said as she took a sip of whatever she was drinking. Sorry about that, Lelich, she apologized on So iPhone's behalf to me. As you may or may not know, I'm the head of the Shihoin family, so naturally the Onmitsukido follows into my squad. So iPhone, as a member of the lesser noble family underneath the Shihoin family, the Fons, was assigned to the Onmitsukido in the unit that acts as my personal guard. Still, she has the skill to be a seated officer and she's always been very adamant about being at my side. Of course, I'm adamant. So iPhone exasperated. What struck as peculiar was the red color accenting her cheeks. No matter where you go, no matter what you do, someone has to keep an eye on you, Yoriyuki-sama. Your family would fall from grace surely if something should befall you. Shihoin Teiko laughed. You worry too much, so iPhone, loosen up. Try to be a bit more like Kisuk. Life's too short to spend it all wound up. I will not act like your third seat, and I stand by my opinion that it was a mistake to give him such an important position. I only want what's best for you, Yuruaki-sama. So iPhone exclaimed. It was easy to see So iPhone's extreme devotion to her captain. One might call it obsessive even. Still, I couldn't help but wonder why she was blushing during most of her exclamations. I also heard mention of Kisuk, Shiho and Teiko's third seat. He was probably Urahara Kisuk, the man Hiroko Teiko mentioned before that has a rivalry with Aizen Fukutaiko in chess. From what I could gather, it sounded like being third seat in the second division was a bigger deal than being the third seat of any other division. It also sounded like this Urahara Kisuk was just as laid back and amiable as Shiho and Teiko. Her bodyguard, So iPhone, who I had only called senpai to keep her from chewing off my head since she was demanding respect, seemed to think both her captain and Urahara Kisuk were too laid back. I started to formulate the possibility that both Shiho and Teiko and Urahara Kisuk might be the kinds of people who cracked jokes even when facing certain death. If they ever found a sword run through their shoulder, they'd probably look at it and go, "Oh look, a flesh wound." Anyway, Hiroko Teiko said as he gave a forceful pat against the center of my back where my shoulders and neck met, "Take a seat, stay a while, Lelich. I brought you here because of Mari and your Yuaki persistence. The least you can do is have a seat and have a drink or two." He walked over to where his empty cushion was and sat down. "Take a seat right at the front, Lelich." Shiho and Teiko pat the part of the table equal arc length from her and carry Teiko. "Ah, thank you, Shiho and Teiko." I took my seat. "Hey, there's no need to be so informal. I don't mind if you call me by my given name." Shiho and Teiko smiled at me. "But your bodyguard." "Oh, don't mind So iPhone, she's just too insecure to address me so informally, so she just refers to me as she does," Shiho and Teiko stated. What she said set So iPhone off as if the poor girl never had anyone tease her before. And oddly enough, once again, she was blushing. I am not insecure. It would be very disrespectful for someone in my position to address your ladyship so informally. I cannot fathom why you allow others to refer to you as such in the first place." "Oh, So iPhone, calm down." Shiho and Teiko reached out and pet So iPhone's head. "Don't worry about me so much. I think it's nice for anyone to have someone as devoted to their superior as she is to you," I told Shiho and Teiko. She didn't realize how fortunate she was to have such a close-knit relationship with the head of her guard. When you have someone who would do anything for you, you could send them on a suicide mission in your stead and they wouldn't even bat an eyelash. Something told me though that Shiho and Teiko and So iPhone's relationship ran deeper than simple professionalism though, or at least that So iPhone either did or would like to think so. Yes, well, I didn't pick her as head of my guard for her mannerisms. I picked her for her skill. Shiho and Teiko responded. "Anyway, try it." "Try what?" I asked. "Call me by my given name, of course. Like I said, it's not a problem and you'll probably have to refer to me or ask me something more than once while you're here, plus it's all too likely we'll wind up seeing each other again. You have the mindset to be part of the second division, you know. You'd be really good for reconnaissance and strategy. Of course, whether or not I could give you a seated officer's position will depend on how you do in the academy. We would be lucky to have you in our squad, wouldn't we, So iPhone?" she asked her bodyguard. So iPhone blushed again. "Why yes, we'd be very fortunate to have you in our squad." I tilted my head counterclockwise a bit and looked at So iPhone peculiarly. I was starting to figure her out, but what was so strikingly odd was how her devotion to her captain went above and beyond what any normal bodyguard would have, to the point where the terms extreme devotion and obsession would understate how much she was attached to her captain. There was only one logical conclusion, but did that mean that So iPhone and Shiho and Teiko, were they? "Lelich, your nose is bleeding, let me get you a handkerchief." Shiho and Teiko got up and walked over to the bookshelf in the room where she scoured through a small box and handed me a silk cloth. "Here." She gave it to me. "Thank you, Yuruaki," I said and brought the handkerchief to my nose. "See, So iPhone, it's not so hard and I don't feel insulted in the slightest," Yuruaki said. "Hey, come to think of it, It's not all that awkward for me either. I realized. I looked at Soifone, who was avoiding her superior's gaze entirely now. I couldn't help but smirk behind the silk cloth in my hands. There's no doubt about it. I had a hard time stifling a chuckle building up. I wonder if Yuruaki has any idea. This is probably not the best time to bring up such things regardless. I decided to continue the topic of conversation where it was left off. Yuruaki, I said. Wow, this is easy. What did you mean when you said I had the basic mindset to become a member of the second division? We've all been sitting around here going through the folders of all the newcomers. As captains, we make all the calls regarding who goes where, and it's never a bad thing to go sifting through folders, even though most of you won't be ready to be actual GoDI members for 6 years. Some people have enough training under their belts to graduate in 4 or 5 years. Yuruaki explained. If memory serves, isn't the record currently 2 years and 4 months? Kiraku Teiko asked. Set by yours truly, no less. You can't forget that part. Akari Teiko smiled. Interested, I switched the topic of conversation. You graduated from the academy in only 2 years and 4 months. Akari Teiko nodded. Although I was not of the child variety, I was quite the prodigy during my academy days. I looked she looked at Soifone, probably about as young as Soifone. Oh yeah, I remember now. How could I forget? I was the captain that oversaw your entrance exam. Yuruaki smiled in reminiscence. Ah, good times. Personally, I always find the second event to be quite the entertainment, as everyone starts falling down, bumping into each other or tripping over themselves. She looked directly at me. No offense, Lelich. None taken. I told her. I knew my physical ability was horrible, and if I were in her position I'd probably be enjoying myself too. Hey, I brought Lelich here so you guys could ask him questions, not the other way around. Hirako Teiko complained. Oh, lighten up, Shinji, Yuruaki told him, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. It's not every day a student gets to meet 4 captains at the same time, especially on such friendly terms. Isn't that sort of the point? Shinji asked with a sigh. We have his written exam. What else could any of us possibly need to know about the kid except details? Kiraku Teiko asked. Speaking of details, what was Sosuke's reaction look like when you beat him? Yuruaki asked. Was it like this? She dropped her mouth open, mimicking a look of complete and utter shock. No, it was probably like this. Akari Teiko said, and then pretended to mimic someone sputtering incoherently and completely dumbfounded of the situation in front of them. I remained silent and just watched Yuruaki and Akari Teiko go back and forth for a bit as they gave different kinds of interesting reactions as to what Izanfuku Taiko did when I declared checkmate. You know, the whole incident is still perfectly captured in my mind like a portrait. I told both women when the back and forth constant guessing started to get boring. Why didn't you say so, Lelich? Go ahead. Yuruaki said to me. It's not all that exciting really, I said. He just glanced between me and the board a couple of times and then nonchalantly tipped the king over. He wasn't very expressive, but I could tell he was really furious. And you baited him several turns ago into taking him with you if you won. Akari Teiko asked me. I did indeed. I answered. What did Aizen want in exchange? Yuruaki asked. You know, in case you lost. My mood became slightly sullen as I recalled what Izanfuku Taiko had asked. My face had to look rather serious when I said, he said he wanted to use a person I was living with and me in an experiment of his. He said something about he couldn't just take people against their will because it would require a bunch of red tape for him to get through. From the sound of it, he wasn't getting many volunteers. Yuruaki chuckled. Maybe your vice captain should try to be a bit more friendly like Kisuk, maybe he'd get volunteers easier, Shinji. Personally, I think the blame lies with Central 46. Those politicians are too uptight for their own good. He answered. Cheers to that. Akari Teiko said, holding up her cup. What's the Central 46? I asked. It was only touched upon briefly in the unrestricted books I picked up out of the library. Ah, you'll learn about them in your history class. Yuriuki hand waved. It'd be unprofessional for us to give you an edge. Given your brilliant mind, if we gave you just a fragment of information you'd unravel the rest of it all on your own. We can't have that. You don't want to become a liability, do you? I know Yuriuki meant that as a joke given how she was, but hearing that still made me swallow due to how unnerving the implications were. Let's not scare the poor kid, shall we? Akari Teiko asked of Yuriuki. She then looked at me. So Lelich, where do you see yourself in 6 years? To be honest, I'd only given things a little bit of thought, but I had formulated a bit of an opinion of where I'd want to end up. Well, from what I've read, I think I'd be best suited for either squads 2, 4, 5, or 12. Personally speaking though, I'd also like to possibly wind up in divisions 9, 13, or 10. Hey now, don't bite off more than you can chew there, Lelich, Hirako Teiko told me. 13 maybe. But Mari and Kensei will have you in a coma by the end of the first week with the way your stamina runs. True enough, my curriculum's pretty strict, Lelich. Akari Teiko hummed as she held up her index finger. Hey, it's nice the kid sets high standards for himself and that he's thought about things at all, having been here less than a day. Yuriuki commented. I'm only saying that unless his stamina spikes to equate to at least half his brain power, Mari and Kensei will be his worst nightmare. Hirako Teiko shrugged. Akari Teiko punched him in the arm lightly. Ow, hey. Cut that out. I get enough abuse from Kiryo's little brat of a vice captain. By Kiryo, are you talking about Hikaifun Kiryo, the captain of Squad 12? I asked. Yeah, Hirako Teiko rubbed his arm, and her lieutenant is a complete and utter brat. Her name is Saraga Kihiri. She's really short, about the size of a child, has blonde hair, with pigtails, and she's got a temper the same size as your brain. I see. I said, taken slightly aback. I don't know why Kiryo made her a vice captain, Hirako Teiko said with his eyes closed. Sure, she's got the brawn and skill set for it, but she's a complete utter bitch. I hear what you're saying. Akari Teiko was in agreement. Kiryo's one of the sweeter captains in the Godiai, and unlike Anohana Senpai, she doesn't have anything hiding behind her smile. Everyone else shuddered at this, including Yuriuki and Homura Fukutaiko. It was surprising given how fearless the former seemed to be and how subdued the latter was. What's this about Anohana? And do you mean Anohana Retsu? The captain of the 4th Division? I asked. If they did, it struck me as odd that the other captains referred to each other by given names, but treated Anohana Retsu with such respect. Kiraku Teiko was the one to respond. Now that we can tell you. In fact, not telling you would be hazardous to your health. I don't like the sound of that. I said. You have every right to think like that, Kiraku Teiko said, just don't say that in front of her. Senpai is the second longest running captain in the Godiai 13. The only person to run longer than her is Yamaji himself. She's 5 years mine and Jushiro's senior as per the academy. And before you ask, yes, I'm referring to Yukatake Jushiro, the captain of Squad 13. To get back to my original point, Senpai is the head of the medical division, Squad 4. She's very soft-spoken and some may describe her as motherly. But there's a dark side to her, that none of us would dare to speak about in detail. Let's just say if she smiles and asks you to do something, or agree with her on a point, unless you want to lose an important appendage or organ, it's in your best interest if you obey. Hirako Teiko picked up the legend as it were. Let's just say if she's mad at you, a more preferable fate would be death by the head captain's bankai. I've hardly ever felt fear before, but hearing that was more unnerving than Yuriuki's earlier comfort. I turned towards said dark-skinned captain for assistance. Please tell me that's an over-exaggeration. It's an over-exaggeration, she said with a sly smile. You don't really mean that, do you? I asked. You said to please tell you that. You didn't ask if it was true or not. She answered. So she likes to play word games, great. And on top of that, note to self, if I ever see Anohana Teiko about, be on my best behavior. Remember what happened to the previous Kenpeki when he tried to stand up to her? Akari Teiko asked. Oof, don't remind me. That was a dark day for the Godiai. Hirako Teiko shuddered. Aren't the Kenpekis supposed to be elite warriors to come once a generation though? I asked. There and the last one, before Kiganjo, was such a hothead that he challenged Ano Hinateko to a duel, questioning her abilities in actual combat since the 4th Division focuses mostly on healing and acts as a support division, while 11th Division is the main combat unit. Hirako Teiko stated. What happened? I asked. I was afraid of the answer. In fact, I was pretty frightened of this woman already. She sounded 4,000 times worse than Cornelia ever was. Let's just say if it wasn't for the fact that Anohana Senpai is a woman, she would have inherited the title of Kenpei, Akari Teiko said. Why leave it at that? Yuriuki asked. It's a story worth sharing. I don't know Yuriuki, I'd like to be able to get some sleep tonight. Kiraku Teiko laughed nervously. Aw come on, I like telling it. Yuriuki put her hands on her hips and grinned. If I've said it once, I've said it a million times. You and Kisuk are both crazy. Hirako Teiko told Yuriuki. You can tell the story, Yuriuki-sama. It was amusing how, despite the fact that iPhone was obviously quaking in fear, possibly having heard the story before, she was still supporting her captain's decisions. This only helped further my suspicions about her. Why don't we leave it up to Lelich? A voice asked. He's the only one who hasn't heard it. Most of us turned our heads in Akari Teiko's direction, but it wasn't her who spoke. I had almost forgotten her vice-captain was here. Yuriuki laughed heartily again. What's the matter, Yuna? You're not normally this quiet. Oh, you know how she gets when she's in unfamiliar company. Akari Teiko defended her. Yuna, I didn't know you were such a shy turtle. Kiraku Teiko raised up his head a bit. You're usually the life of the party. Gomini, Homurafuku Teiko apologized. I'm only now getting used to our guest's presence. Yuriuki laughed again. It's okay, Yuna. Yes, it's okay. iPhone repeated. iPhone, you don't have to be my echo. Yuriuki told her. My apologies, Yuriuki-sama. iPhone shied away. Well, Lelich, do you want to hear it? Homurafuku Teiko asked me. The more we talk about it, the more curious I'm getting. I said. I had a feeling I'd regret saying it though. Kiraku Teiko sighed. Good luck getting to sleep tonight. Go ahead, Yuriuki. Akari Teiko told her. Right. So as one of the lucky observers to the showdown, along with several others, none of which thankfully are in this room, I think only Kisuk and I ever can look back on the incident and not be scarred for life. Those of us who heard about the showdown gathered on Sokioku Hill to watch the fight. The whole thing was so one-sided that if it wasn't for the fact that some of us were wetting ourselves in sheer terror of Anohana Teiko's abilities, we would have been laughing at how utterly trounced the now ex-Juakubantai Teiko was getting. What was really scary though wasn't the fight, but the gruesome finish. Wait, she killed him. I was amazed. Oh no, she left him alive, stitched his whole body back up herself after the fight. If you think her smile is scary, pray you never see her undo her hair and let it flow out behind her. I thought the then current Kenpei was going to be lucky to keep his post before she did that, but after she did let her hair flow out like that, I soon changed my mentality to thinking that he would be lucky to be alive. The poor man was practically useless after she was done with him. Didn't she get in trouble with the Central 46? I asked. It didn't matter to me what their role was. There was no way a power standing higher than the captain's would allow the maiming of a captain by another captain like that. Oh, they called her in and had a good chat with her, but she didn't get in trouble in the slightest. It's like we keep saying. She smiles, you obey. End of discussion. I didn't know what was scarier, Anohana Teiko's reputation, or the fact that Yuriuki wasn't bothered about all of this in the slightest. Let's quit while we're ahead here, Yuriuki. Kiraku Teiko held up his hand. Senpai has a scary habit of popping up when we're talking about her. Maybe she automatically knows who's talking about her when she sneezes. I said. Yuriuki and Akari Teiko burst out laughing. I didn't know you had a sense of humor, Yuriuki cackled. Who does? A calm voice called out. It sounded like it belonged to a woman many years Yuriuki and Akari Teiko's senior. I looked at Hirako Teiko and Kiraku Teiko's horror-stricken faces and noticed how the whole room had gone silent. I had a feeling Ano Hinateko had to be right behind me. I turned my head to see a woman with black hair, looped in front of her, going down the middle of her torso. She was wearing a captain's haori and she had grey-blue eyes. I didn't know we had a student visiting us. The woman said, "Ah, Ano Hinateko, he's." Yuriuki picked up a folder lying on the table and handed it to her. "This is his folder." She handed the woman, who I now could confirm as Captain Ano Hinaretsu, a manila folder with my name written on one side of it. I surveyed today's entrance exam, and when Mari here got a hold of our guest's folder, she wanted to meet him. Yuriuki thought the same thing after she saw it. So they persuaded me to bring him here. Hirako Teiko stated. Yuriuki seemed to get worried as she watched Ano Hinateko scan through my exam so slowly. I'll look at question 37. Question 30. She flipped to the appropriate page and looked it over. Ah, yes, I can see why that would spark some interest. Still, bringing a student outside the academy grounds for something that can only be described as a social gathering is rather unusual. Please don't be mad, senpai. Kiraku Teiko was practically begging. Why would I be mad? She asked. All I said was that this was a highly unusual occurrence. Ah, right, ahaha. Kiraku Teiko laughed nervously. Lamperouge-san. Ano Hinateko called to me formally. Hearing myself referred to so informally was a little peculiar. Everyone I knew either called me by my name, or Zero. Then again, I only ever was around family, friends, or the Black Knights. Then again, even my teachers called me by my name. If it's all right with you, I said, getting up, turning around and bowing to Ano Hinateko, I would prefer being referred to by my given name. There is no need for a captain of your caliber to waste honorifics with me. Honorifics are not a waste. It is a sign of respect or unfamiliarity. Ano Hinateko stated. But if you prefer me to call me by your given name, Lelich, then I shall do so. Now shall we go? Go? Go where? I asked. The other captains seemed to have lost track of time, and it's almost curfew for students. It wouldn't look good on your record if you weren't escorted back. She told me. Ano Hina-senpai, Akari Teiko got to her feet. I was the one who formally requested Lelich's presence. It would only be fair for me to. Ano Hina cut Akari Teiko off. I shall escort Lelich back to his dorm, Himari-san. She smiled at her, and what Kiraku and Hirako Teiko said about her smiling proved to be no exaggeration. She was smiling so sweetly, like an innocent schoolgirl or a kind mother, and although her tone of voice suggested otherwise, it was apparent that going against her authority could turn you into nothing but a mere memory. This was further evidenced by the fact that Akari Teiko sat down almost immediately and said, "Hi, Sumimasen." Ano Hinateko looked at me. "Shall we go, Lelich?" "Hi, Ano Hinateko." I followed after her. "Been nice knowing you, Lelich," Hirako Teiko said, which did not make me feel any better about the situation. What did though was when I heard him get punched in the arm, most likely by Akari Teiko, which meant he had only said that to make me feel like I was walking to the end of my afterlife. "I can take you to the academy grounds, okay?" Ano Hinateko asked me. "Hi, that's fine," I responded. "I can get to my dorm room on my own." The walk between us was rather wordless. The stars and the moon were already shining in the sky. Only when I could tell that we were almost to the point that the academy would be in sight was the silence broken by Ano Hinateko. "So how do you like the Siratai, Lelich?" she asked me. "I've only been here 2 days including today, but I do not dislike it. I don't know what you read out of my profile or if it's listed, but stamina isn't my strong suit, so I'm hoping I can improve that by being here," I told her. "Yes, it's written in your report in Hirako Teiko's handwriting that you were panting like a dog in summertime, so drained of energy you were like a defective mannequin," she told me. "That's not inaccurate." I sighed in shame. "There's nothing to be ashamed of," she stated. Hirako Teiko also wrote that it was admirable that you pushed yourself to keep going despite the fact that your spirit energy was almost completely drained after the halfway point. He said many students had quit, but you pushed yourself to at least remain in motion despite the fact that you couldn't run. She paused before adding, That says a lot about you as a person, Lelich. What does it say exactly? I asked. It shows that you have an iron will and fierce determination. Very few soul reapers start off with such a quality. A lot of newcomers are easily discouraged and impulsive. I did not get to read your entire profile, but what I read shows that you have remarkable potential, Lelich. If you overcome your limited stamina and build upon your assets, you will make a fine addition to the GoDI. Who knows, one day you might even become a captain should the opportunity present itself. Anohana Teiko told me. That's very high praise coming from a woman in your position, thank you. I told her. What do you mean by a woman in my position? She asked. I have to make something up. There are 313 responses, most of which could end with me losing an organ or suffering severe bleeding. I got it. You know, you're the second longest running captain in the GoDI. You must have high quality judgment to determine who would be an asset and who is simply wasting their time. She smiled, but not with her eyes closed. I suppose you're right about that. After a few more steps, she and I arrived at the academy gates. She opened the door for me. If any of the administrators question you, tell them you were with me. She told me. I'll be sure to do that. I smiled to her. Even if that weren't the case, I might have said that. In fact, everyone seems to be so afraid of her in this organization, not that I don't blame them, that might make for a useful excuse every now and then. Good night, Lelich, may you succeed in reaching your goals. Anohana gave a shallow bow to me. I bowed low to show my respect. Thank you very much, Anohana Teiko. There is no need to thank me, she said with an unclosed eye smile, now run along. I nodded and headed back to my room. I arrived and looked at the clock on the wall. It was a little after 9 p.m. I took off my sandals and socks and slid by Zanpakuto under my bed, but within easy reach like I had the night before. It's not that I didn't think this place was safe, but in such a wide area anything could happen really. Not to mention the fact that although I had made my mark in amongst members of the GoDI, it wasn't enough that they could come running to my aid on a moment's notice. I'm not oblivious to the fact that I look rather appetizing to anyone with an anger management issue or to someone with the same interests as a Catholic priest, so the safest place for my sword was under my bed within easy reach to fend off unwanted company. I didn't know enough about the GoDI to cast doubt on such possibilities, and even then I would leave nothing to chance. There's at least one bad apple in every batch, as the saying goes. I pushed down on the mattress with my palm before pivoting my body and sitting down on the bed, then I lay down on my side, facing away from the door, and pulled up the blanket up to my shoulder, closed my eyes and went to sleep. Check the description for the links to the